Hello, today on my channel you will hear an amazing story about life. I hope you enjoy this story. This one struck me to the core. Honestly, I still can't forget it. Enjoy watching.
Yes, Judy traded in that cottage cheese, chopped up the nuts for the yak roll. She was mentally grappling with the dilemma of whether she should get into the venture of this New York wedding. An extra income to spend on herself certainly wouldn't hurt. But there would be a lot of strangers at a rowdy gathering in a restaurant. She wasn't a fan of such drunken hangouts. Yesterday they'd heard the usual spin at the local market in Chicago, winding up their perennial song, "Hold on, beautiful. Give me your hand, give me a coin, and I'll tell you the whole truth." Or immediately switch to "Men, don't hurry to leave. There's a surprise waiting for you at home. Do you want me to tell you?" What a trick it was to guess the future and guess the past. Only Judy really knew how to do. For her, Hannah took company to confuse, attract, distract, talk, swindle more money, take valuables right off the victim and drag her away. They both knew how to do it. Judy was a little ironic about her trade as a fortune teller. For a long time, she didn't believe she had any special abilities in that field, although she had the prerequisites. If her mother only made it seem that she could guess, as if she could see through everyone at once. Her maternal grandmother kept silent about it, but had such a sharp eye, as if she could see through X-rays. She could even tell how long the poor man had to live before the birds flew off, to the fact that she herself would soon be on her way. The grandmother cut off her little granddaughter's talent at once, but she said nothing to the Gypsy tribe about it. She kept telling the girl's mother, "Let's wait until the time is right, or the Baron will start sending the little girl to the trade from childhood. Let her have at least a little piece of carefree childhood." It was as if she had seen into water. There were few carefree years in her destiny. Judy's temper wasn't weak, and her husband Joe hadn't had a bad night so far. She heated his borscht, his pie, but brought little money from the market. It was all her fault. They were married by arrangement. Joe didn't like his wife, but he tolerated her. She went into her corner of the house like a prisoner. One thing she'd been good at for 16 years was giving birth to children beautiful, greedy, perky. Judy was third in line after her two older brothers. She was followed by the carefree Hannah, and then a younger brother. Then the heavens decided that this family had enough children. The whole friendly company grew up, absorbing the traditions of their people with their mother's milk. At first, Judy, a pretty young gypsy girl, was not taken seriously at the market. They took her into the general crowd of women of various ages, who trafficked in the marketplaces and near the train stations, for numbers. The situation changed by chance. Gypsies, like kites, pounced on some modest girl from the provinces, surrounded her and talked at cross purposes. "Why are you crying? Come on, let us tell fortunes, let us help you." The girl responded, "Hopefully my fiancé received a funeral from a hot spot, and I carry his child under my heart. I can't stay alone. We have no orphanage, and no one else in this world." At the sound of the young woman's voice, Judy felt as if bells were ringing in her head. A picture swam before her eyes: a hospital bed, an unconscious boy with a bandaged head, doctors' voices saying that the fighter had no papers. She abruptly tore toward the crying mommy-to-be, shouted in her ear, "Your fiancé in the hospital is alive, lost his memory. Go to the military department, look for traces of him." Taking a breath, she added, "Give me your hand and a coin, my good girl, I'm not lying. I'll come here once a month, on a Tuesday like today. One day you will come to meet me not alone." She said the last words in sepulchral silence. The other gypsy women were silent. They knew how to mislead gullible citizens. But there was something convincing in Judy's speech that made them believe that she was telling the truth and not deceiving the unfortunate woman. Surrounded by the crowd, the young woman remained silent. Then she answered eagerly, "I give you my word, if my soulmate turns out to be alive, we will come to meet you together." The incident with the prediction became a kind of legend in the Tabor. At first everyone laughed at Judy's confidence in her prediction, but everything turned out just as she had told the woman. 3 months later, two people were waiting for the young gypsy at the train station: a smiling guy with a large scar on his face, and a girl who was already quite rounded and radiant with happiness. They brought a huge bunch of wildflowers, hugged Judy, and thanked her. Does this story sound like a fairy tale? Not at all. Wise life does even more incredible things to people. Now Judy was sent to work every chance she got. She even had her own clientele, and every time it was the same bells ringing in her ears and visions of pictures. Sometimes she could catch words. Judy thought there was nothing mystical about her abilities. It's just that sometimes Providence gives a person the gift of seeing a little more than others. But there was nothing magical or witchy about that talent. She suspected that her grandmother had been the same way with predictions, but she, like Judy, never told anyone about her quirks. They wouldn't believe her. They'd think she was crazy. And Judy was married off at 16. Tribal customs were rarely broken. When a beautiful girl was ripe, why waste time? It's true that Gypsy women age much earlier than women of other ethnicities. Some women would give birth to several children in a row. At 30 to 35 years old, the husband already sees an old woman in front of him, or, at best, a mature, older woman. The female sex in the Tabor suffered a lot. They only had time to walk free while they were listed as potential brides, without much care and hard labor. And then children appeared. Household and work to deceive gullible victims took away women's time and beauty. Judy's fate was like that of many, but she became a widow 3 weeks after her wedding. The young husband and his older men had wandered into the wrong private farm with a high fence. A shot in the back caught the boy near the stables. From then on, Judy wore a shawl, an apron, and beads of coins instead of beads. She lived in her husband's clan, following the laws of the Tabor, the same for all. So today they stood and wandered through the marketplace, looking people over carefully, and then their adventure found itself. A tall, brightly colored, richly dressed girl was strolling through the rows of exotic fruits. When she saw the gypsies, she stopped like a stumbling block. Then she went to them herself. There was no need to lay verbal snares or traps of sweet promises. Judy sensed who the girl walking toward them from afar was. The shiny outer wrapping was only a mask. In the strange young lady's chest beat a kind, merciful heart, and the fortune teller also saw a beauty in a wedding dress, on which a dirty stain darkened on the side. The bride was in danger. But she had no idea of it. The girl came closer to the gypsies and smiled radiantly. "How do you do?" "I've been looking for you," she said bluntly. "Unlike other cunning customers, it would not have been difficult for me to find out where you live in the city. But I didn't think it was appropriate for me to come into a foreign monastery with my own rules." Judy squinted. "Why did such a beautiful woman need us? Do you want to fortune-telling, to find out your fate?" "I've never hurt my little sister," she said. "If she wants to have fun, to cheat someone out of money, I'll give way." But this time she was adamant. "Stand back, I'll talk to this girl myself, or I'll tell fortunes if she wants." Their vis-a-vis again smiled broadly. "Then let's get acquainted," said the girl. "I'm Hannah. I'm getting married in 2 weeks. I want to give our guests an exotic surprise by inviting a gypsy woman to read fortunes. Don't worry. You'll be treated with the respect you deserve at the event. Only I'd like to invite the best of you to the party so she can tell us what she sees without deception." Judy's eyes suddenly blurred, and then she saw Hannah again in her gorgeous wedding dress, but the hem at the side was in mud. A gray darkness, and in the bride's eyes, horror and incomprehension. What has this pretty girl bode for this strange marriage? "I'm the best fortune teller among my friends," Judy said aloud. "But I must consider whether I should come to you. I don't like the idea so far. Let's meet at the same place in 2 days. I'll think about it, and if I decide, I'll come to you and we'll talk about the terms." Hannah began to thank her, assuring her that she wouldn't begrudge her money. But Judy was not thinking now that she would be richer, that she would be able to buy fabric for a new skirt. She wouldn't have to humiliate herself in front of others to get a new skirt. In the invitation to take part in the entertainment at the wedding, she felt a challenge to her abilities, a kind of test for her gift. The young woman laid out the prepared nuts on a dough base with cottage cheese and rolled the product into a roll with perfected movements. She cooked it very skillfully in the Tabor. Even the older, experienced women recognized it. So they entrusted her to make her favorite gypsy dessert. The day after tomorrow, there is a big event in her husband's family, the wedding of one of the younger sons. Another young family will move into the house. It's a good thing no one is trespassing. Their spacious room, where she and her husband lived, was left entirely to her. The young widow was feared in the clan. She was mysterious and silent. Such gypsies were best to be shunned. It had always been believed that people who were cheerful and nomadic had paranormal powers, but Judy was well aware that it was all fiction. She had no education, of course, but she was not naturally stupid. At the Baron's behest, she completed 9 grades. In an ordinary high school, she easily mastered modern gadgets, a cell phone, which she swindled from a woman aunt in exchange for information about her runaway husband. I got it up and running in no time, or rather with a few keystrokes. Yeah, I checked the contact list, Judy said. Here's Hannah's number. She'd promised to text the happy bride to see if they'd meet, but she didn't have a decision to make yet. And she remembered how, here in her dead husband's house, she had suddenly discovered a thin book about gypsies. Some foreign author had insisted that the first representatives of Roma communities had appeared in northern India, and from there they had spread all over the world. And the scientist also tried to explain the mystical things that always surround the life of this people with a halo. He saw the solution to the mysterious phenomena in the fact that the Roma from God inherent ability to be amazing psychologists. They read how a person will behave by his appearance, behavior, gestures, and facial expressions. Hence the birth of this amazing ability to guess and predict. They feel other people's souls, as if gypsies are able to extract all the information about a person. There was a knock at the door of her room. It was James, her father-in-law. "Come out to the common room. I have something to talk to you about," he said. The woman was surprised. Everyone in her husband's family treated her as if she were an alien element that everyone had to put up with. No warmth, no participation, cold, polite aloofness. And then suddenly the head of the family wants to give her an audience, a young gypsy. As if a clue immediately popped into her head. They don't avoid you because you remain a stranger to them. They're all afraid of you. The coldness of animal fear. James is afraid of your gift. You can feel it even here in your room. Judy hurried into the huge hall where everyone usually gathered on feast days. Her father-in-law started the conversation right from his seat. "Louis's," he said. "He was the oldest son in the family. He's in big trouble. The Baron himself suspects him of treason against our clan. The coffin-swearing ritual is scheduled for tomorrow. The woodwork for it is already being prepared." Judy is dumbfounded. In her 19 years, she had only twice witnessed this simultaneously frightening and strange event. It was seldom used in the Tabor, only sworn on an icon. What could Joe have done that was so serious? She asked. The young woman saw that her father-in-law did not want her to know the details. But apparently he had no other choice. The essence of the ritual was that the suspect lies in a coffin specially nailed for him, James explained. He would lie in close captivity, and the kin who accused him would surround the coffin, listening intently to his every word. There was a belief that if the accused lied, if he did not confess his sin honestly, he would not live. He would go to the other world soon after the ritual, no matter how much he denied his offense. James was silent for a moment, searching for words. "I think he's being accused of 2 betrayals at once," he said at last. "We thought we'd check tomorrow. The first is that he hid money and valuables from his tribesmen. The second is that he took it to a Russian woman, having deceived the Tabor. Everyone knows that you see through everyone. Talk to my eldest son tonight. Look into his soul. I want to know the truth beforehand. If it's my fault," James was silent. Judy listened to the man in silence. The accusations the gypsies made against Louis were serious. She didn't want to take part in this medieval ritual, nor did she want to meet the eldest son of a disturbed relative. There was nothing to do. She nodded her head in agreement that she would do her best. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of activity. A wedding in a Tabor is an extensive event. Even how many guests would be seated at the table, one could never guess in advance. The joyous event was just under 2 days away. And then there was the bad timing of the fight with Louise. The atmosphere in the house was getting more and more heated. The eldest son, Louis, had returned at nightfall. The head of the family immediately called Dave and drove all the curious people out of the pompous, rich gypsy hall. Even Judy was asked to leave. She looked up at Louis. He was known among his own people as a fine-looking man, just as his mother's name promised. He had been married for a long time, but had little interest in the child. Their quarters were tidy, and the children grew up well-fed and contented. He had done his duty as a man, and his 28-year-old wife seemed old to him. They'd been together 11 years. What kind of heartfelt relationship could there be, except boring duties? Louis smiled as Judy began to dig into his soul. It seemed that tomorrow's vows in the coffin didn't scare him, didn't worry him. Judy took his hand, which by gypsy terms was impertinent to a man. But Louis did not object. He knew his brother's widow was revered in the family for her gift. The young woman ran her finger along the lines on the palm of his left hand, and once again looked carefully into his eyes. "You are taking such a risk for this woman for nothing," she said. "She doesn't love you. She is ruled only by greed. You've given her expensive gifts, taken her to the fanciest restaurants and broken Gypsy rules. She didn't appreciate it. I see you between two fires, in one burning the remnants of your passionate love for her, in the other, the remains of national honor. It doesn't matter now whether you swear in your coffin or tell the truth. Your life is short, and you will be buried in the same wooden box." Louis glared angrily at Judy, knowing she was never wrong in her predictions. He snatched his hand away from her. "Snake," he hissed. "You women are all the same. You don't marry gypsies for love, you spend your whole life being dominated by them," Louis said. "In the worst case, you hate them fiercely. And Slavic women are vicious, sweet as honey, manky, promising heavenly pleasures and then selling their men. I'll check my favorite woman. And tomorrow I'll tell the gypsies the truth. If I don't like my Hannah, I'd rather find out for myself. You keep your mouth shut." Louis stormed out of the hall. James appeared in the big room, giving Judy a hard look. "Tell me what you saw." "Was he guilty?" he asked. The woman answered. "But you take your time. His time on this earth is ending. It is a matter of days. And then there is the wedding. Until it takes place, the family will wear mourning and the viands prepared for the table will be used as memorials." James grabbed Judy by the shoulders. "Shut up, you damned girl," he shouted. "I feel like I'm losing my oldest son. How do I get over this grief? How do I move on with my life?" Realizing that he was showing weakness in front of the woman, James faltered, wrapping his arms around his head. "Tomorrow will show how things will be," he said. "Maybe the Baron will be gracious enough to postpone the wedding because of the tragedy in our house." The bells of anticipation were still ringing in Judy's head. There was so much on her mind right now. She mustn't let on that she already knew the outcome of the story. What if everything would be wrong? But the fortune teller clearly saw everything with her inner sight, her intuition, her talent as a seer, the future of her eldest son, James. The moment he admits to the tribesmen that he's been stealing from their commonwealth. The roar of the meeting, the angry shouts, the calls for cruel punishment. Then the Baron's permission to bring the punishment 2 days later. Here was Louis rushing to his beloved with a fabulously expensive new piece of jewelry in a pouch. He has borrowed it again from the Tabor, but he fears nothing. His heart burns with love and doubt. He wants to look into the eyes of his mistress, Hannah, and their conversation and Hannah's ironic laughter. Some people behind Louis back. The bag with the necklace is stained with the blood of a gypsy in love. Louis's pompous funeral. Despite his actions, the Tabor mourned. The coming days with their events flashed before Judy's eyes in a single string, then melted away. She touched James's shoulder with cold fingers. "You have some very tragic days ahead of you," Judy ventured. "It would be better if you rested and regained your strength now." With those words, she slipped out of the hall and hurried to her corner of the house. She would need her strength too. And tomorrow morning she must send word to Hannah that she would be willing to read fortunes at the wedding for the newlyweds' guests. She still felt that the bride's invitation would have important consequences for herself as well. She must deal with it. Hannah met her guest, full of surprises, on the doorstep of the restaurant and immediately exclaimed joyfully, "How nice of you to accept the invitation to participate in our wedding festivities. And why are you wearing a black outfit? Did you wear it on purpose to make the fortune-telling look more convincing?" "No, beautiful. In our Tabor, my husband's family is in great grief. We have sent one of us to his final resting place. Now we'll be in mourning for 40 days. Men won't even shave their beards and women won't take scissors to cut their unruly hair. But you shall not take sorrow into my heart. I will fulfill all that I promised you." In the picturesquely decorated hall, among the flower baskets, bright boughs and inflatable balloons with hearts, in her black skirt and shirt, Judy looked so contrasting that the guests immediately began to whisper in wonder, "Who is this gypsy woman? Why is she here?" Hannah didn't keep them waiting long. She approached the hostess, took the microphone from her, and loudly announced, "There is an unusual young woman at our party today. She came here at my request to add an original zest to the party. Her name is Dave. Any of you who want to know your fate on a happy day for my husband and me can talk to the fortune teller in the small room next to the hall. In the meantime, we'll continue our banquet," Hannah said, taking back the reins. Looking into the hall, she smiled. The women reached for the bar. Only her husband Max's mother, Judy, remained at the table next to her son. The offer of fortune-telling did not seem to inspire her, and she habitually told the dressed-up young ladies different stories than her heart would calm down. Today Dave was lucky. There were some ladies in the crowd excited by the marvelous opportunity. She hadn't come across any cases where someone had to be upset by a prediction. But that was except for a woman who had been whispered to by a gypsy that her husband had a second family with a baby on the way. To the gypsy woman's amazement, this news did not faze the pleasant guest. "Are you really astute?" She smiled sadly and replied, "I know about my husband's second family. It's all natural. I cannot have children, and he always dreamed of an heir." The next interesting story awaited an imposing man who decided to learn his fate from the fortune teller. "Are you surprised that the male sex also believes in the abilities of fortune tellers?" he asked honestly. "I have it because I am tired of loneliness. None of my relationships with women have not yet ended in marriage. And I want a full-fledged family, children. The years are wasting away." Hearing the man's confession, Dave suddenly felt some strange connection between him and the woman who took it lightly that her husband had another family and a child on the side. A coincidence? Then another one came up. A marvelously good-looking middle-aged woman said trustingly to the gypsy, "I was married. We lived soul to soul with my husband until I fell in love. He was rich, lucky, handsome. We had nothing. He played with me like a cat with a mouse. He'd ask me out on a romantic date with a mountain of flowers and presents. Then he'd disappear for 2 weeks. So I figured he wasn't getting close to me because I was married. Well, I did the decent thing," the woman continued. "I came home and told my husband everything as it was. I couldn't live without another man. He silently let me go, gave me a divorce. And my gorgeous chosen one, as it turned out, was just having fun, communicating with me, finding out whether I will lead on his advances. Himself at this time met with another woman with serious intentions. They soon married, already raising 2 children. Finding myself with nothing, I went back. It was as if a fog had lifted from my eyes. I tried to get my husband back. Our son had just started 1st grade. My ex-husband and I even lived together for a while, but we couldn't glue the broken cup of our love together. We split up again. Since then, he's been alone and I've been alone. No matter who we try to build relationships with, everything fails." Dave wrinkled her nose painfully. Alarm bells were going off in her head as the woman's narrative progressed, and for some reason Hannah's wedding dress with the dirty stain on the hem came into view. She couldn't put it all together, but she intuitively felt that the clue was hidden somewhere here, at this wedding reception. The flow of people wanting to know the future gradually dried up. The bride entered the room where Dave was sitting and immediately declared, "Don't think I'm crazy. I beg you to stay with me at the wedding until the end. Something's bothering me. I can't figure out what it is that's bothering me." At first, Dave wanted to give up the prospect of sitting in the restaurant for a few more hours, but there was such a touching plea in Hannah's eyes that she changed her mind. With a sigh, she agreed. The delighted bride immediately dragged her to the table, not listening to any objections. "I'll seat you next to your father's special guests. He worked side by side with them for years, and they were kind enough to fly in for our celebration. Come on, they're amazing people." And she couldn't handle it. And there's no hiding it. She was very hungry. The tables at the feast were arranged in groups. Now Hannah led her to the far cozy corner, covered with a snow-white tablecloth, set on straw. One thing kept her mind off it. Dave had the feeling that her back was being drilled by someone's unkind gaze, just like a storm in a glass of water. She turned around sharply. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious. Dressed-up men and women, talking, dancing, laughing, the voice of the host inviting to participate in another funny contest. At the table with food and drink, Dave couldn't believe her ears, even slowed down as she walked. It seemed to her that the people behind it were speaking in her own language. But as she listened, she realized that she understood only individual words, not the general meaning of what was being said. These guests were unusually dressed, swarthy, and the women wore numerous jeweled ornaments. The speech was calm, a little unhurried. They were Dad's colleagues from India, Hannah explained, noticing Dave's confusion for a moment. He worked in that hospitable country in the diplomatic corps. All my childhood and youth were spent in the north of India. I speak Hindi quite well. Hindi? Dave struggled to pronounce the unfamiliar word. What's that? It's one of the Indian languages that many Hindus understand. Come on, I'll introduce you. The guests at the dinner table greeted her like family, as if they had known the young woman for a long time. They treated her to appetizing appetizers and tried to pour champagne or wine into her glass. Dave put a stop to any attempt to get her drunk. It was bad enough to show up at the table drunk, or at least drunk. Gypsy women were punished severely for such things. It was better to smoke a pipe or cigarettes. This bad habit was tolerated in the tribe. I didn't realize how I had calmed down, relaxed, and felt confident among these people. She explained it to herself by the fact that she did not feel any threat or danger from them. She did not expect a trick. Meanwhile, Hannah soon found her again. She asked her if the fortune teller was hungry. Hannah asked if Dave would be willing to meet her husband Max and his mother. Both girls didn't notice that a handsome young man had followed them up from the table. What happened next was terrifying. The closer Hannah and Dave got to Max and Judy, the more woozy the gypsy woman's legs became. The figure of the groom's mother also became tense. In the fortune teller's mind, the alarm bells were not ringing, but clanging. The picture was one of an old woman standing in front of her, pointing her finger at something behind her. When it melted away like a haze, Dave saw the clue clearly and remembered one of the old fortune teller's lessons. I'll remember one very important thing. You and I are neither witches nor wizards. In the gypsy family, sometimes such unusual, special women are born who are given not only to skillful fortune-telling, but also to see through figures and faces. Do you know that gypsy women like us have enemies, women of other nationalities with an evil eye, as they say in any nation? You will always see such a person in the crowd, feel her insidious energy, her attempt to resist you exposing her, revealing her true nature to everyone. Now in front of her stood exactly that specimen of a malicious woman who could ruin the lives of others with just a black look thrown after her. With a single wish pointed at someone's back. The basis of such spoilage, envy. Such women do not need to look for witch doctors to put a disease, misfortune on a person, to surround him with problems. Hannah's mother-in-law was one of them. Dave, without hesitation, went up to her and performed the ritual her grandmother had once taught her. She spat directly at Max's mother's feet, and the crowd around her just gasped. Everyone felt uncomfortable. The fortune teller's act seemed too impertinent. Immediately, a lot of questions arose, which no one dared to say out loud. The party was ruined, and Dave herself touched Max's mother's sleeve with icy fingers and passed out. The audience became even more excited. They parted. "Please, I'm a doctor," came a man's voice with a slight accent. The man who had followed Hannah from the Hindu table was making his way to the gypsy. He quickly picked up the fainting fortune teller in his arms and asked Hannah, "Where can I examine her? Is there any separate room here?" The bride nodded readily. "There is a room in which I have been fortune-telling for those who wish to do so. There are several chairs set up in a row, and there is a large table." Tyler brought the gypsy woman into the room and thought about the fact that she smelled like strawberry soap. Why soap, he couldn't explain to himself. He just remembered a visit to his father at work in India, at the then Soviet embassy. He had needed to go to the toilet, and there were large pink bars of soap in elegant soap boxes, smelling wonderfully of something fruity. Later he asked his father what that scent was. He smiled and replied that it smelled like strawberries. Then came his studies in Russia, which had already separated from the rest of the republics. Tyler graduated from a medical institute in Moscow, practiced together with graduation, then had long internships in India and got married. Tyler's wife drowned 3 years ago, and he devoted himself entirely to his son. No woman since he had become a widower had stirred as much emotion in him as this gypsy woman. The man smiled at his thoughts. Scientists in medical circles often argue about whether people can be drawn to their bloodmates, or whether it's all fiction, because there's no such thing as blood. He was a descendant of gypsies by his mother and grandmother, and immediately felt something close, his own, native in her. After bringing his burden into a separate room, Tyler closed the door in front of everyone. To his annoyance, there was nothing from his medical supplies at hand. There was no ammonia in the restaurant's first aid kit, or anything that would be useful for such a deep faint. Hannah was shivering. He had to cover her with the blanket he'd found in the place. It seemed to him that she was dreaming a terrible dream, from which she could not escape to reality. They didn't call an ambulance. Tyler assured everyone that the gypsy woman's life and health were not in danger. He'll stay close by and keep an eye on things. She had a colorful dream. The park is buzzing with fresh spring greenery. Two pretty girls are sitting on a bench, talking animatedly. "Judy, I want to share a secret with you," as my best friend said one. "Charlie confessed his love to me yesterday. We want to get married after sophomore year. He wants me to have a son as soon as possible. After all, he is from a close-knit family with many children. And he loves his sisters and brothers very much." The girl called Judy darkens her gaze, her eyes filling with piercing blackness. She turns to her friend and asks, "Go get a frozen one." "I twisted my leg yesterday in gym class. I'm still limping." The happy girl runs to the candy stand and Judy whispers in her ear, "Charlie's mine. I've been in love with him for a long time. Who the hell do you think you are? There will be no happiness in your family, no sons and daughters." The picture in her head shatters into 1,000 pieces. Now there's another frame in front of her, like a movie. A man and a woman in the kitchen. In front of him is a plate of frozen soup. There are tears in the woman's eyes. "I understand and accept everything as it is," she says. "We've been married for 15 years. You have always been faithful to me. We waited together for children's voices to ring out in our house. I won't hold you back. Go where your dream will soon come true. But I still can't. I can't live without you. If you can forgive me and accept me, I'll live on 2 families." A woman gets distracted by a phone call, answers it. "Sue, no, don't cry. You're imagining things. I'll meet you at work tomorrow, as agreed. Yeah, you're right. It's a good thing you and I graduated from the same college and never parted again. Of course, I love you too." The vision fades away, and for a while she falls into an empty, dark abyss. "And what does your aunt do, if it's no secret?" The girl laughed again. "Aunt Susan, if I may say so, is a local businesswoman, or rather a farmer. She has a small farm which gives a good income. But I don't like that kind of work, so I decided to try my luck in the big city." "And how did that work out?" "It's hard to say, because I haven't lived here for a year yet. I had plans to combine work and study, but it's not working out yet." The girl held out her hand. "Give me my bag and thank you for your help. This is the house where I live." Bob was saddened by such a quick parting. This girl was not like the others. With her, the young man felt comfortable. With obvious regret, he said, "It's a pity we came so soon. You and I had such a nice conversation. I wish we could have continued chatting." The girl picked up on it. "Yeah, and you didn't even ask my name." The young man laughed. "Right. Okay, it's not too late to catch up, Bob." He bowed beautifully, which delighted the girl beyond belief. "Nice to meet you." "I'm Emily. You have a very pretty name," Bob said. The girl lowered her gaze modestly, but did not hurry to leave. She waited as if waiting for something else to happen, and Bob asked uncertainly, "Emily, can I hope to meet you?" The girl looked up. Although it was 20 degrees outside, Bob felt the warmth of the spring sun, and the thought flashed through his mind, "I want those eyes to look at me for the rest of my life." Emily agreed to go out with him, and she behaved simply, without coquetry and other feminine tricks. The next day they met. Bob, as is customary in such cases, gave the girl a gift. True, it was not flowers, but a rather original composition of spruce sprigs. The gift caused Emily a childish delight. Oh, how lovely. Unobtrusive, meaningful. "I'll have your gift instead of a Christmas tree." Bob made an unexpected suggestion. "Emily, how would you like us to spend New Year's Eve together? After all, our meeting at the supermarket is symbolic. Moreover, I do not have a small living space, so I have a place for a real Christmas tree." The girl immediately agreed. "I'm happy to take you up on your offer. To be honest, I have no one to celebrate New Year's Eve with. At first I wanted to go to Aunt Susan's. She's been asking me to visit for a long time, but that plan is unrealizable because of my job. I have to work on the 1st of the month." "Where do you work?" Bob asked cautiously. "Oh, in a restaurant." "I wash dishes, of course, not a very good job, but for lack of a better option, I have to make a living in this unenviable way." Bob immediately pictured Emily in her dishwasher's clothes, and he felt a little uncomfortable. He walked the girl to the driveway and said a quick goodbye. He didn't walk home, but almost ran, and half-heartedly wondered, "Why am I so unlucky?" For the first time in my life, I met a girl I liked. And again, a bummer. How will I present such a wife to my colleagues? James Marcus will laugh when he hears about Emily's work. No, I'm done with this dating thing. But after 24 hours, Bob realized that it's one thing to set a task, and quite another to accomplish it. It's especially hard, almost impossible to deal with feelings when love has already come into your heart. 2 more days passed, and Bob realized that all his thoughts were focused on Emily. His heart raced with excitement as he dialed the girl's number, and then he heard her melodious voice. "Bob, where have you been so long? Maybe you've changed your mind about celebrating New Year's Eve together." The young man said the first thing that came to his mind. "Of course I haven't changed my mind. But all these days I puzzled over what to get you." The girl laughed. "Have you not yet realized that the most expensive gift for me is yourself? And do not even think of spending money on unnecessary trinkets." Smith's heart was immediately relieved. Emily may not have a very prestigious job, but she doesn't make exaggerated demands. She would definitely make a perfect wife. They celebrated New Year's Eve together. Under the chimes, Bob proposed to the girl, and instead of a wedding ring, he decorated the girl's ring finger with a metal element from a champagne cork. "Emily," the man said solemnly, "of course this is not a real engagement ring, but I want our hearts to be joined today." Emily was thrilled again. "It's just amazing, almost like in the movies. I'm going to treasure this ring for the rest of my life. Even if it doesn't work out, I'll keep it." Smith felt truly happy for the first time in his life. "Emily, we're going to make it. We're going to be the happiest couple on earth." Emily came home, and the upcoming children's party was still on her mind. All day she tried to decide what she could make a princess costume, in which her daughter Emma would look worthy. But all the outfits from little Emma's closet were not suitable for this purpose. The woman was horrified at the thought of having to humiliate herself in front of her husband, begging for money for a new dress for the little girl. Bob, as usual, will squeamishly wrinkle his nose and say for a girl of 4 years old is quite suitable for what she has in her closet. "Well, you buy her this dress, she'll wear it a couple times, and that's it. Think of something, but I won't give you any money." Of course, Emily could buy clothes for her daughter from her paycheck, but she gave all the money to her husband. In their family, it was so established from the first day after the wedding, when Bob jokingly suggested to Emily to make life easier for you in your new position as a wife. "I'm ready to take on the financial part." The woman in love did not see anything objectionable in this proposal and immediately agreed. "All right, let it be as you say." Only a few weeks later, she realized that she had made a fatal mistake, allocating money for various items of expenditure. Her husband demanded accountability from her. He collected receipts from stores and filed them in a notebook. Bob kept a new notebook every month. In all the years they'd been together, he'd never deviated from that rule. Ashamed to admit, but even for underwear and hygiene items, Emily had to ask him and then report on the prescribed form. With such unhappy thoughts, the woman approached her house, dialing the code on the intercom. She thought, "I wonder how long I can hold out," as she waited for the elevator. Martha Emanuel came out of her apartment. "Emily, how are you doing? How's Emma doing?" Emily put a smile on her face. "We're doing well. We're getting ready with Emma for the fall ball. She's going to be a princess at the party." The pensioner clapped her hands. "Oh, that's so cute. There's something about children's parties that we adults can't understand. This something is called sincerity. Children can't lie, they are always honest." Martha Emanuel looked at her young neighbor as if she were seeing her for the first time. "You're right, Emily. The thought never occurred to me." The elevator door rattled open, and Emily wished her neighbor well. But no sooner had she entered the apartment than she heard the deafening ringing of her cell phone. Emily rummaged through her bag, trying to find a means of communication. But where are you? Where could she have put you? The phone continued to ring with impatience, but the owner of the gadget only after a minute realized that it was in the pocket of her cloak. While the search was going on, she was quite nervous, so with some irritation she threw into the receiver. "Hello, I'm listening." The cell phone answered in the voice of Uncle Benjamin, her niece's daughter. "Why are you answering your uncle so rudely?" "I'm worried, you might say, all over. I'm excited about the unknown." Emily's mood changed dramatically. "Oh, Uncle Benjamin, I'm so sorry. I didn't see who was calling. I thought someone had gotten the wrong number again." I heard a relative laughing heartily. "That's what it came down to. I almost sent my uncle away. And all because you forgot about me in your town. Emily made excuses. Uncle Benjamin, I had not forgotten. I was going to visit you, but I can't do it yet. I can't get away from work. And Emma's kindergarten party is coming up, so I have to get her costume ready. Benjamin Jackson was very happy to hear the news. So I showed up, by the way. Emily asked in surprise. How do you mean you showed up? The usual train ride. Uncle Benjamin was clearly on a roll, which pleased and frightened Emily Jones at the same time. She imagined the grimace her husband would make when he learned of her relative's arrival. But when she asked her uncle if there was room for him in the apartment, Emily answered with a feigned joy. Uncle Benjamin, how are you not ashamed to ask such questions? Sure, come on over. And I'm already here at the elevator, opening the door to welcome the guest. When Bob Smith came home from work, he was only slightly surprised to see his wife's relative in his favorite spot in the kitchen. The men embraced and Uncle Benjamin offered in a hostess manner. Come on, Bob, sit down. I brought the cash with me. I cooked my own recipe. The guest nodded toward the refrigerator. There's a servelat and a sausage. Homemade sausage. Bob wrinkled his nose. What? Uncle laughed. My own sausage, I said. People gave it such a name because this unique product is prepared in the most accessible and primitive way. But it doesn't contain any chemicals. You can't buy such sausage in your supermarkets. Bob's gaze warmed a little after he learned that the uncle had not come empty-handed. After a short feast, Benjamin Jackson took out an unattractive-looking wallet and accompanied his action with the words, "Since I came without gifts, buy what you need." I didn't have time to go shopping. Bob reached for the money, but Uncle Benjamin laughed. What are you, Bob? The family budget should be with the hostess. The guest defiantly shook the bills in front of his son-in-law's nose and then handed them to his niece. Buy, Emily Jones, something for yourself and your granddaughter. The young woman rejoiced. Oh, thank you, Uncle Benjamin. Emma needs to buy a dress for the fall ball. She'll have a present from her grandfather. Bob looked at his wife with an unkind look, but he couldn't help it. Emily could see his anger roiling him and rejoiced at her husband's torment. But the most important test awaited the Johnsons ahead. As Emily Jones cleared the table, Uncle Benjamin said, Emily, I did not just show up, I need to do some paperwork. The woman didn't pay much attention to the words. She thought that her uncle had some business to attend to in town. But Benjamin Jackson, after a short silence, said with a sigh, No intrigue. Not even interesting. I thought you were going to start questioning me. What papers? Why? Bob decided to answer for his wife. You take no offense to your niece. Emily has been a little distracted lately, so he doesn't immediately turn on his brain. But can you tell me? I'll explain it to her later. I intend to give my cottage to my niece, my late sister's daughter. Bob Smith's eyes lit up again with two greedy lights. Yes, that's quite a gift. And where is the ancestral cottage? Benjamin Jackson explained in his usual manner. We have it on the farm. Emily should remember. She used to hang out there with the local kids when she was a kid. I've got a place to stay myself. That's why I decided not to wait for death, and while still alive to assign the house of grandfather Emily. I made a promise to her mother that I would take care of my niece. My sister has done a lot for me and my family. Now it's time to pay my debts. The guest tapped his palm lightly on the tabletop. So tomorrow, Emily Jones, let's go with you to the notary, formalize everything properly, and then dispose of your property. Whatever you want, you can sell it, or you can live on your own. Fate is like that. You never know when or where it's going to turn. The next day, Emily took time off work to go with her uncle to the notary. They spent the whole day collecting certificates, and then waited an hour and a half for their turn under the office of the lawyer, whom Uncle John was advised by an acquaintance. When all the formalities were over, Uncle John said with satisfaction, Well, Emily Jones, that's it. Now you have your own corner. If things get tough, will you have a place to go? After his visit to the notary, Benjamin Jackson hurried to the station, though his nieces begged him to stay another day. I can't stay too long, Emily. I have a household there. I almost got my neighbor to look after it. I hope you remember Aunt Anne. The young woman nodded her head. How could I not? She used to get us with the boys with nettles when we climbed into her garden to eat cherries. I got the worst of it. Uncle John laughed. I remember the incident well. Your mother was still alive and resented her friend's cruelty. Oh, by the way, Fred, Anne's son, is back in the family. Things didn't work out for him in the city. He's a businessman now, owns his own sawmill. But his love life's a mess. Anne was complaining to the women that her father had some kind of spell on her. I don't believe in any of that nonsense. Emily listened to her uncle, and it made her sad to realize that he was leaving again. Uncle Ben, it's like the sun comes out of the clouds and you're leaving again. You could have stayed a couple more days. We haven't even had a chance to talk. The older man smiled. The atmosphere in your house is not conducive to a heart-to-heart talk. You'd better come and we'll talk to you then. And at the same time, you will evaluate your inheritance. I don't think I'll be able to do that anytime soon. Maybe I'll come in the spring, Emily said uncertainly. What's there to see? I remember my grandfather's hut well. Benjamin Jackson squinted slyly. You should still come and see it. After seeing her relative off, Emily headed for the daycare center. She decided to pick up her daughter early so she could get to the store. Daughter, you and I are now going to buy you a dress for the fall ball, said her mother to Emma. The girl hugged Emily. Mommy, I will be the prettiest at the ball. I've already learned the whole poem. They returned home tired but satisfied. Bob Smith met his wife in the hallway with a reproach. Where have you been? And why isn't dinner ready? Emily grinned. You could have made yourself a quick meal if you were so hungry. My daughter and I went shopping and spent the money Uncle Ben gave us. Look what a lovely dress we bought. The young woman began to hastily unwrap the roll with the main purchase, but the head of the family angrily threw the dress aside. You've got something to brag about. A waste of money. And I can see that you've gotten a little cocky lately. To tell you the truth, I don't like it at all. Emily wouldn't shut up. I don't like a lot of things either, Bob, but I put up with it. And what is it that you don't like? The man asked with a sneer. Your pathological greed. I'm sick of begging you for pennies. I'm tired of wearing rags and holes in my pantyhose. The man said with a sneer. If you are so tired of everything, you can go back to your farm. After all, you are now the rightful owner of Grandpa's house. Emily realized that if she answered her husband, everything could end in another scandal. Emily was very tired, and once again the young woman remained silent. 2 months had passed since her uncle's arrival in New York. The relatively warm fall was replaced by an incomprehensible off-season. It could rain in the morning, and by evening white flakes of snow were already swirling over the city. As a child, Emily had not tolerated such climatic swings well and was often ill. Her health failed her this time too. The day before, the young woman had gotten her feet wet because her old boots were in complete disrepair, and there was nothing to buy new shoes with. Emily still hoped that her immune system would be able to cope, but in the morning she felt a pain in her feet. She had to take a day off work and head to the clinic. After a long wait in a line of people sneezing and coughing, she was admitted. The young doctor listened to her lungs for a long time and then said, I don't like your breathing. You should be hospitalized. The woman panicked. No, doctor. I can't. I have no one to leave my little girl with. You will prescribe me a stronger medicine, and I will be treated at home. The doctor hesitated for a long time, but then he gave in. All right, I'll prescribe you one medicine. It's very effective, but it doesn't come cheap. Emily grasped the doctor's offer like a drowning man grasping at straws. Prescribe it. And I'll buy those pills today. The doctor wrote her prescriptions and told her to come back in 2 days. Emily picked up her daughter Emma from daycare and stopped by the pharmacy on the way home. She knew there were expensive medications, but she didn't realize the prices could get this high. Just in case, the woman asked the pharmacist, Maybe you can offer me a cheaper analog? The girl in the white coat rounded her eyes. I would love to, but this drug has no analogs. Will you take it? Not yet. Emily took the prescription back. By evening, the fever had risen even higher, and the woman tried everything to bring the fever down a little. Bob watched his wife in silence and expressed no sympathy. Only towards nightfall he said with evident displeasure, I don't want you to make me sick. Until you get better, sleep in the living room. Her husband's words were the last straw. Even though Emily could barely stand on her feet, she spilled everything she had accumulated over the years of patience on Bob. I can't believe he's afraid of catching a disease. Dear husband, do you want to give me some money for my medication? The doctor prescribed me some effective pills. He said I can be cured in 2 days. Well, will you give me the money? Or is it greed that prevents you from showing mercy even to your own wife? Bob Smith raised his eyebrows in surprise. You can talk, but I'll speak frankly. I believe that it is not necessary to buy expensive pills. You can bring down a fever with a simple medicine, and I'll tell you that you're sick because you're nervous. You should move more. Then no disease can get the better of you. Emily couldn't remember herself. You're a spender yourself. One day you'll choke on your money, and no one will help you. The man was furious. He didn't expect such unforgivable insolence from his always submissive wife. You dare insult me in my own house? Get out of here. Get out with your things and live on your pittance. Emma was awakened by her father's shout. The girl ran out of her room in tears. Daddy, why are you yelling at Mommy? Bob knew he shouldn't scare a small child, but he couldn't control himself. I'm yelling because your mom wants too much. All she knows how to do is demand, and I'm not going to waste my blood money on her dubious schemes. Emily lashed out at her husband. So my health is a fool's errand for you. Money is more important to you. You think I don't know that you deposit the lion's share of your salary in a bank account? The man yelled. How do you know? Have you seen the statement? Did you go through your shirt? I found it when I washed your clothes. The man finally lost his temper. You're going through my pockets. Get out. I don't want a wife like that. Emma cried even louder. Daddy, you're bad. You're bad too. If I'm so bad, get out of here with your mommy. Get out of here. He was out of control. Emily, holding her daughter close to her, watched her husband throw her and her little girl's things out of the closet. The woman froze in a stupor, temporarily forgetting her illness. Bob Smith, on the other hand, couldn't control his anger. He threw everything he could get his hands on the floor. Pack your things and get out. I can live without you. Emily didn't live up to my trust. I'm practically a god to you. You're just like all the other self-serving and ungrateful ones. Little Emma was the first to recover from her shock. Mommy, I'll do the packing. And you give me the bag. Emily packed her things in a suitcase and a travel bag. Without a word to her husband, she and her daughter left the apartment. The woman understood that it was useless to look for a shelter at night, but suddenly remembered about a kind neighbor who had helped her more than once. Martha Emanuel was very surprised when someone rang her doorbell at such a late hour. When she saw Emily, pale and tangled in her shawl, and Emma, the old woman understood. Emily, come in. I guess you're in big trouble. But if you don't want to, you don't have to tell me. In any case, I won't refuse to help you. The young woman told her neighbor about her illness and her husband's wild antics. Martha Emanuel was struck by her story. Is your husband so stingy that he spares even for the child? I would never have thought, because on the look of such a decent man and dressed well, Emily said tiredly. For himself, he spares no expense. It's me and the little one who are like unwanted ballast for him. It's a pity I've only just realized it. Martha Emanuel wisely remarked. Nothing, my girl, you are still very young, and you have everything ahead of you. I am the one who has nothing to look forward to. Tell me, please, who is the man who came to you in the fall? Emily looked at the pensioner with interest. That's Uncle John, my mom's brother. He's been living alone for a long time, and he came to give me the deed to his father's house. The neighbor girl perked up. That's very good. So you have somewhere to go? Emily and Emma stayed with the kind neighbor for a few days. The young woman tried to settle the formalities at the daycare center and at work as quickly as possible. She still had hope that Bob Smith would come to his senses, apologize to her and her little daughter. But that didn't happen. After a week of waiting, Emily finally decided to leave. Martha Emanuel saw her and Emma off at the station. At the moment of parting, it was very touching, and the elderly woman confessed. Emily, I sincerely envy you, because you have a chance to change your life for the better. I don't have that opportunity. Emily hugged her neighbor and said quietly, "Aunt Martha, I'll be sure to call you. And I'm sure we'll meet again very soon." The train moved smoothly. Martha Emanuel waved her handkerchief. The old woman's mind was full of thoughts. Her heart was filled with hope that all was not yet lost. Bob Smith opened the door of his apartment and looked around the hallway. He found no sign of intruders, though he would have liked to see such signs. It had been almost 3 years since the night he had kicked his wife and young daughter out. The man was sure then that within 24 hours Emily would come begging him tearfully, "Bob, I'm sorry I overreacted. It won't happen again." But a day passed, then another. The wife was in no hurry to come forward. Bob knew she'd been taken in by a neighbor on the first floor. After a week of waiting, which was not easy for him, he called Martha Emanuel's apartment, and she was not surprised to see him without a hint of gloating. The woman calmly said, "Your wife and daughter just left today." Emily said her uncle gave her a house. She went there. I saw them off. This news only caused annoyance. But Bob wasn't going to give up. Every night he mentally argued with his runaway wife. True, this argument was more like the monologue of a resentful loser. Bob Smith wondered aloud, "What have you proved?" "Only that you're a stupid provincial idiot. So you'll live in your Uncle John's house, living in poverty. Because you, Emily, you've got nothing. You didn't even bother to go to college. And believe me, no one wants an uneducated woman like you. You should have stuck to me with your hands and feet and not shown your true self." The role of the ungrateful wife was usually played by the teapot, but sometimes Bob Smith addressed his appeal to the refrigerator or washing machine. Every day the loneliness grew greater. In addition, his soul was soothed by the thought that his former wife suffers even more. Johnson hardly remembered his little daughter, for always, since her birth, he had considered the little girl a part of his wife. No affection for his own child, the man did not feel. But there was something in Bob Smith's life that stimulated him to live. And that compelling factor was a bank account. After his wife's elopement, he'd put away almost his entire paycheck. He had to save on everything, including food. But Bob reassured himself it's okay. It's just a little bit of patience left. Johnson's cherished goal was the sum of 10 million. He dreamed of investing these savings in some profitable business. This was hinted at by James Marcus, to whom he accidentally blabbed about his bank account. The former classmate was not surprised. He even praised him. "Johnson, you are good. You're a good friend. I'll be honest with you. I'm also saving a little bit to start my own business. And I even have one creative idea about it. It's possible that you and I could be partners very soon." "Oh, brother, we're getting rich." Marcus spoke to him as an equal, and it inspired Johnson. Long ago in his youth, Bob had felt the wings behind him again. He believed that all his sacrifices would pay off later, and he would live a long and very happy life. Would James Marcus help him to do so? The man had tried several times to have relationships with women, but on the personal front he was still haunted by sheer failure. James Marcus laughed at him unapologetically. "Johnson, you are failing and will continue to fail if you do not change everything," he said. "And what do you think I need to do to make women treat me favorably? Don't be stingy. I realize that greed has already gnawed at your liver, but at least forget about it for a while. Show your generosity." Bob Smith realized that there was a rational grain in his friend's advice, but he could not overcome his stinginess. Greed was already ingrained in his DNA, and there was no way in nature to change that. One evening, Bob Smith was contemplating life out of habit. Suddenly, a crazy thought struck him. "If Emily doesn't want to come back, I'll force her. I'll make fun of her airs." Johnson seized on the thought and began to pack for the road. He was not embarrassed by the fact that at the initiative of his ex-wife, their marriage was dissolved 2 years ago. Bob Smith still believed in his exceptionalism. On the way to the detained in the middle of nowhere farm, he imagined how Emily and her daughter were living in poverty. He was even willing to spare some money to demonstrate the generosity of his soul. But most of all, Johnson wanted to humiliate the woman who dared to disobey him. His imagination painted impressive scenes of a meeting where he was the master of the situation and his ex-wife was crying, begging him to let her return. He wanted to linger again, as in his childhood, in that reality of his own devising. But the commuter train stopped at the station where he had to get off. Bob vaguely remembered the way to the village where Benjamin Jackson lived, though he could have used the local cab drivers. The man set off on foot, asking the rare passersby several times where my Shekina's farm was. Strangers answered him in detail and then asked him why he was going there. The man replied evasively, "I have relatives there." I decided to visit. Finally, he reached his destination. But instead of a shabby house, he saw a 2-story cottage in the center of the manicured lawns with a swimming pool. The man's surprise even took his breath away. He thought, "I must be mistaken. I'll have to ask the locals again." A woman in a bathing suit and a stylish hat with wide brim came out of the elite mansion. Bob Smith quickened his step. "I'll ask this lady where Emily lives." The woman noticed him too and waited for him to come closer. The top of her face was covered by the brim of her hat, so Bob didn't immediately recognize her. He greeted the stranger politely. "Hello, I'm looking for a good acquaintance of mine. She lives around here somewhere. Maybe you can give me a hint?" The woman took off her sunglasses, and Bob shrieked in surprise. "Is that you? But how?" Emily Jones laughed long and with undisguised pleasure at her ex-husband. After calming down a little, she said, "I knew that we will meet again one day, and 1,000 times imagined this meeting, but never thought that everything will be so prosaic. I guess you came here to make fun of me." But it turned out the other way around. A girl came running out of the house, a girl Bob hardly recognized as his daughter. "Mommy, Daddy's calling for you." Emma called out to her mother. "Michael is awake and cranky, and Daddy doesn't know what to do with him." Emily looked at her daughter affectionately. "Okay, Emma. Tell Daddy I'm on my way." The girl looked suspiciously at Bob standing at the gate. "Mom, who is that uncle?" "A passerby. He's looking for his relatives." Emily hugged her daughter, and together they walked towards the house. Bob stood at the gate for a long time, waiting for his ex-wife to show up again. But Emily never came out. Johnson was completely devastated. Only now he realized that there was something more important in the world than money, something that could not be bought even for 10 million. It was a terrible blow. But complete disaster awaited Johnson ahead. When he arrived at the office on Monday, he was shocked by the news his boss had given him. "Johnson, I'm putting you in Marcus's place. So be proud and happy." A terrible guess burned Bob's brain, but he still asked, "Where is James Marcus?" And exclaimed with joy, "Your buddy got away in a hurry. He got lucky. An unknown relative gave him $10 million. Imagine how lucky a man is. Now your friend can live happily and not think about anything." Johnson realized that Marcus had cheated him out of $10 million. It was ruin, his lifelong dream. But there was nothing he could do to change it. Amber considered herself as much a part of these places as the dry air that smelled of wormwood, or the huge stones that broke through from the walls of an ancient fortress. Where else? On these stones. She'd been born here, true, not really, but closer to the sea. But their family had moved to this small town when Amber had just started walking. And in 18 years, the girl had become flesh of his flesh. It was a purely female family. No, of course, her grandmother had once had a husband, but Amber no longer remembered her grandfather. He had died long ago, before she was born. She had a father, too. And he was the one she remembered, and she loved him very much. But he couldn't find a job that would allow his family to live in relative poverty. So he took a job as a shift worker, flying across the country every month, far beyond the Rocky Mountains. Mom began patching holes after years of being broke. The family needed everything from new bedding to replace dilapidated ones to coats and boots for growing Amber. Dad loved the West. He told stories of bright summer nights casting tin, of funny coyotes, of moss falling underfoot in the swamps when he went huckleberry picking. But Dad had not only found his place in life, he'd also found a soulmate, someone named Lauren, who worked for him as a cook. He never came back with Lauren. Lauren had her own apartment in Sacramento, and out west, they were given a room in a dormitory for shift workers. Her father continued to send money for Amber, probably most of his Western earnings. Amber didn't want to touch them. Some call it adolescent maximalism, others call it the kind of mental purity that only comes from youth. Amber demanded the transfers be sent back, She didn't want to be tied to this man from the moment he cheated until the end of her days. The blow was stronger, for she was very attached to her father. The only daughter, used to thinking she was the most favorite. Her mother was lost, looking from Amber to her grandmother for guidance. If Amber wanted to mentally picture her mom, the first thing that came to mind was her always scared and unsure look. "You don't want the money, don't take it." "You're right," Grandma said calmly, and made a sign to her daughter. "Temmie, leave her alone." "I know it's going to be hard on Mom." Amber knew what her family was thinking. "I'm going to work. There are different ways to live." "Better, worse," Grandma said. "We'll adjust. But remember about Mom, she has poor health." When the women were alone, Grandma told her daughter, "Make an account in Amber's name and put the money in that account. We'll get by somehow. The girl's conscience will be clear. If she wants to someday, and will return to his father every penny, and you can safely look into the eyes of John." Sometimes husbands tell their ex-wives they're living off their alimony. And if, God forbid, I die, that money will come in handy for Amber when she's an adult. Amber didn't know about the second part of the plan and stoically accepted the fact that their little family had the bare necessities. Her mom worked at the library, and she loved books so much that she sometimes brought them back from the dumpster. That was a trend lately. People threw away books, sometimes their own, sometimes inherited from the older generation. After all, anything could be found on the internet. Why clutter up the house with dusty tomes? Mom brought books in dirty bags, or just holding them to her chest. Their own library had grown so large that some of it had moved into the guest house in the garden. But the library paid pennies, and my mother wrote term papers and theses for students in the evenings. Behind each work was a specific goal. Things were bought the cheapest, and still ahead loomed a long list of things that could not do without, and every item on that list was a mom's sleepless night. Amber was used to not asking for anything for herself, not even a refill at the table. Too often lunch was cooked for 2 or 3 days. But the girl early had to think about how to adapt her hands and head to some business. At first, Amber helped her grandmother, twiddling her thumbs. If you compare the family to a ship that sails on the sea called everyday life, then Mom could not be called the captain. She wouldn't rise above a diligent sailor. And when my father left, Grandma took the bridge, and Amber became her right hand. Whether it was standing at the stove, peeling apricots, ironing curtains, Amber uncomplainingly learned and did everything, though her nature asked for something else, and she was not a diligent learner. Even when her father lived at home, Amber realized happiness it is when after an early breakfast, snapped out of the house, all the paths are yours, and with the sky you can be alone. And there is so much strength inside you that you perceive as an unfortunate misunderstanding the impossibility to spread your arms and fly to be swayed by warm winds. It was from her father that she got her love of vagabonding. And he also taught his daughter that when you can, all day long you are satisfied with a piece of bread taken from home, as long as it was sprinkled with salt when you memorize the road so that you will never get lost and come back, wherever you have wandered. When you don't pay attention to fatigue, to pains in your legs, and you can walk as long as it takes, if it's worth it. And it was worth it. Amber wasn't looking for beautiful, picture-perfect views like the others. She wasn't taking selfies. She wasn't seeking out some of the youth's favorite pastimes. At first, there was simply not enough money for that, and then the girl began to feel like a white crow among her peers and did not even try to become her own in the pack. She simply did not know and could not discuss what they knew and loved. And what touched her, frightened her, amazed or delighted her, left them completely indifferent. "I know what you want to be," Valerie, a classmate who sat at the same desk with Amber, and with whom Amber had a more trusting relationship than with the other kids, once told her. "You want to drive field trips." This happened after the teacher assigned them to write a trivial essay about the love of their homeland. Amber was choking on the topic. There was so much to tell. She was steeped in legends as much as her hair was steeped in sea air. She wanted to talk about everything, and about her favorite gorge, near which a robber had once kidnapped a girl, and she, not resigned to her fate, became a mermaid, and about the valley, where long shadows from the rocks of bizarre, sinister figures come to life in the last hour before sunset. The rocks are motionless, and the shadows fluctuate, reaching out to each other, as if talking, gesturing without words, and about the stone, which fulfills wishes, but charges a terrible price for it. It was impossible not to mention. I read it. The teacher said to her the next day, "Tell us, I want the boys to hear it too. Tell it in your own words, maybe add something else." And instead of English class that day, the class listened to Amber. Among the children were those who went abroad with their parents every summer, or even Christmas vacation. But now they were enthusiastically questioning the girl. Where is that? Have you been there yourself? And how to get there? Do wishes really come true? That's when Valerie dropped out, tucking her textbooks into her bag. You're probably going to be a tour guide, Amber. You're a genius. When she was still in high school, she got a job at a museum complex. There were tons of them. They hired her as a curator. That meant serve, take, get out for herself, for that guy, and for the cleaning lady. And then she started leading tours. First in the low season, when it's not too crowded. Then with other, already experienced women. And now she had her own page on the internet, and on the author's excursions, which offered Amber, signed up in line. She bought a car, the loan for which she had to pay off until the second coming. And she took people to places the guides rarely went, unless they were desperate amateurs. Mostly her clients were families or young couples who were no strangers to romance. And many, many people asked enthusiastically at the end of the tour, "Don't you take them to the fortress?" Amber never took anyone to the fortress, although for a long time it was a very popular route. Until someone upstairs decided that it could be dangerous for tourist stones crumble, and sometimes whole blocks collapse from the fortress walls, cave vaults collapse. It would be good to reconstruct, but there was no money for reconstruction, of course. And the excursions became illegal. They were offered as part of other routes in the vicinity. The guide tempted, let's pay a little more per nose and go to the most extraordinary place we have in our neighborhood. But Amber never took anyone to the fortress. It was her sanctuary. Jerry realized he had been cruelly played. He was barely alive, you might say, after a worsening ulcer. When he'd been seized that night, none of the household had thought it was that serious or, one might even say, that bad. But Lisa did not want to long to look at the suffering of her husband. Jerry was lying in the fetal position, afraid to move, so as not to become more painful, and called an ambulance. Everyone thought that the matter would be limited to drips and hospitalization for a week. At the very least, surgery. But Jerry wasn't getting any better. The tests didn't seem to show anything critical. But the surgeon took him to the table, rather guided by intuition, which has and will continue to help real doctors. And in the process it was discovered that from the smart devices, it turns out, something can escape. And it was hard to take Jerry away from death. He came hard from anesthesia, and for several days even the strongest drugs did not significantly alleviate his suffering. The head nurse was particularly warm to him. She was the one who came up with the idea of letting Jerry sleep at all costs, because sleep is health. She persuaded the doctor to add sleeping pills to the prescribed medication. It probably wouldn't have had much effect on anyone else, but for Jerry it worked wonders. The pain was greatly reduced. He felt in himself that fracture, after which began, though slow, long, but still the way to recovery. And then his many friends came up with the idea to play his wife, which they could not stand too much. Lisa was in love with herself. And what's worse, after getting married, Jerry, who before that knew every dog in town, began to behave much more withdrawn. Now Lisa was deciding where they would go and whether they would go at all, who to invite to visit and in front of whom to close the door, and so on. When Lisa complained to her husband that she cannot tolerate women, so she does not get along in any team, for her coquetry, felt that they do not like me, because I am prettier than them, and because you carry me in your arms. But there were enough men on whom Lisa not only did not make any impression, she annoyed them. Usually too much manners, fixated on themselves, accustomed to being served. Lisa usually visited her husband after visiting hours were over. She and Jerry had a goodwill at the hospital, and once again Lisa was demonstrating that she was different. She didn't fill her bag with cans of hot food, she brought only fruit and water, sitting by her husband's bedside like a graceful butterfly. As she thought herself, a viper, as others thought. The prank the Powells had planned turned out to be cruel not only to Lisa, but to Jerry himself. But when they had conceived it, it had seemed so successful that the friends, as they say, had balked at the consequences. Without difficulty, they found a smashing girlfriend of one of them who agreed to play the part. They asked the same head nurse for a white coat on some pretext. One of the friends was on duty in the corridor, waiting for Lisa to arrive to give the signal. Jerry was asleep in his room. He had gotten his sleep in his sleeping pills early today, and Lisa, entering the room, caught a wild picture. The nurse was wearing almost nothing, only a conventional white robe on her shoulders. She was sitting in front of her husband, in a pose that the young woman found the most obscene of all possible. Legs spread, showing off her charms. The nurse was holding a plate of omelets, scooping them into a spoon and clearly about to feed Jerry. The friends knew Lisa's character well enough to calculate how she would behave. The woman didn't squeal, didn't throw a tantrum. She simply dropped her bag and stormed out of the room. A few minutes later, one of the buddies came out, smiling. The scene gave him pleasure. Let her feel for once not like a queen, but take the place she deserves, a bitch in her own right. Lisa hadn't shown up at the hospital since. When Jerry called, she hung up, and when he was discharged, he had to move back in with his parents. He hoped temporarily. Sooner or later, he and Lisa would reconcile. She didn't even notice I was asleep, Jerry lamented. They'd chosen a pose so she couldn't see my face. Except that sister's a stripper, for crying out loud. I had no idea what the bastards were up to. I call them up, and they're laughing their asses off. You should thank us for saving you from that snake. At least we gave you a break. It'll kill you. Jason listened to Jerry's wailing and went about his business. Maybe that's why Jerry came to him. He knew he'd be listened to, but not ridiculed, judged, or bombarded with advice. Jason lived a hermit's life. If it could be said of a man who didn't live in a cave or a hut, whose apartment was on the top floor of a 5-story building, a 2-bedroom in a Khrushchevka on the edge of a big city, and then the private sector began. From the balcony you could see the river. There was a bus ring curled up near the house. There was a mini market and a few stores. Jason would come down here to get groceries, and when he decided to buy what he needed, he'd go back upstairs almost immediately. But sometimes he'd still take a walk to the river. The old houses had long ago pushed the 2- and 3-story mansions away from the embankment, and there was only one way to get to the shore, past the high fences that kept out the elite from the nobility. Jason walked without realizing he was walking like a prisoner with his hands behind his back, standing by the water for long periods of time. Even if it was windy and damp, the Mississippi was cold just to look at. Sometimes he took a different route and went up into the mountains. It was a short walk to them, just a couple of streets, and here he was at the foot of one of them. And a paved road serpentine led to the top. It was used to take children to the camp every day. There was a mast on the mountain. There was also a radio and television station. The serpentine lengthened the way a little, but it was not worth going straight ahead. There were vipers on the slopes when it was warm, and he had to be careful not to step on one. None of Jason's friends lived like him. They considered him a crank, but agreed that perhaps his profession required it. Jason wrote books. Those who had known him for years said that he had been different before, a romantic with a wanderlust, an athlete who had achieved a lot. A man who was open-minded, even overly so. And Jason had met his Emily on one of his camping trips. Both of them were the kind of reckless people that old songs talk about. The old compass is calibrated, the maps and edges are obtained, and to storms like avalanches, the treacherous trail. Happy to whom the pinching feeling of the road is familiar, but where the wind tears horizons and blows the dawn. Jason brought the girl to his town right after that hike, straight from the Appalachians. They'd rented a room, then inherited the apartment, which Jason had never changed since. And for the few years he and Emily lived here, their house was open to everyone. There wasn't an evening when friends didn't gather, and even the neighbors would come over to listen to guitar songs and say, "You guys don't need a TV." Jason was writing his second book at the time. The first was well received, and it gave him confidence that the path is chosen correctly. You just need to go and go on it, every day marking the right number of steps. Well, that is lines. Jason went to the sea to finish the novel, and Emily, of course, went with him. It was already low season, and prices were down, so it was hoped that it would be possible to live by the sea for a few months. Money was still tight. But in late October, Jason returned home to bury Emily. The young woman's death had been a tragic accident, but even among her closest friends, no one knew anything for sure. It seemed that Emily had crashed after falling from a height, either during an excursion or during an outing with her husband in the mountains, or maybe on the rocks. It was believable. The boys were not particularly careful, and they'd had all sorts of adventurous adventures before. Emily was buried in a closed casket. Jason hadn't notified anyone about the funeral. Whoever found out by chance showed up, and it was immediately apparent that Jason had changed dramatically. He was silent, as if he had water in his mouth, hardly answering questions, ignoring condolences, and apparently wanting to be left alone. Well, grief affects everyone differently. Some people go to people to cry on someone else's shoulder. And some people don't want to expose the bleeding wound in their soul. Eventually, they got rid of Jason, gave him a chance to live the life he now wanted, and he craved privacy. From then on, he spent most of his time in the apartment, allowing himself nothing but occasional walks. But he still wrote books. True, they had changed. If before they were novels, twisted plot, where the adventures of the heroes did not give the reader an extra breath, then now Jason apparently was not capable of such a thing. Once he was fond of biathlon, took places in competitions, and now wrote stories about sports in the style of realism, with knowledge, but not so exciting anymore. Before he had a rifle for biathlon and excellent skis. When he gave up sports, he sold it all, but later he bought a gun again, an expensive hunting rifle. Now it hung over his bed at home. It was probably the most valuable thing in the house. "What do you need it for?" John asked him one day. He went to his friend's house more often than anyone else. Jason hadn't completely closed the door on his old friends, and everyone knew they could come to him and ask to stay for a few days. For example, if there was a family quarrel. And now John was practically living at his place. You don't go hunting anyway. You say you can't kill anyone. Jason looked at his friend without a smile. Maybe I'm just saying that. Or was it before? John was confused. He didn't know whether to take it as a joke or as. There was something about Jason's look that. Until now, he'd been sure that his friend was incapable of raising a hand against anyone. Now all he had to do was break the awkward pause and turn the conversation to something else. Well, that was easy. "How am I supposed to make up with Lisa?" John asked wistfully. "She not only does not want to talk to me on the phone, but also does not let me home." It was clear to everyone Lisa wants to be begged for forgiveness. But in her heart, she's also afraid that John won't have the patience. She's walking the line. In her version, John should demonstrate such a degree of remorse and beg for forgiveness in such ways that it becomes legendary among mutual acquaintances. But there's another option: John could give up and find someone else. Then Lisa, too, will have to start her life from scratch. And there's nothing worse for her. "I don't understand," Jason said. "What are you worried about? Is Lisa alive? That's the most important thing. And the rest." And he waved his hand. So John stopped talking and couldn't say anything else. Amber had a piece of jewelry in her left ear, an earring. For some reason, a single, small ruby drop. It had been threaded in her lobe for as long as Amber could remember. The earring was discreet, and Amber hardly ever thought about it, except once, when she decided at 13 to really pierce both ears and put earrings in. Girls that age have a tendency to want nothing more than earrings in their ears at a certain point in their lives. "Okay, let's go to the beautician." Mom agreed when Amber couldn't resist telling her what she wanted. "And for your birthday, I'll give you earrings, gold. Of course I cannot, but silver." "I'll take this one off." Amber picked up a red droplet with her fingernail. She'd lost her pair anyway. "I'm like a pirate, wearing it in one ear." "No, Mom and Grandma," exclaimed at the same time. "Why? Is there something I don't know? Is this some kind of family legend? Do you cherish Sergei as a memory?" Amber looked from one woman to another, and she could feel her loved ones hesitating to tell her anything. "Just put it on and consider it a fairy tale," her grandmother added. Amber's eyes lit up. Scary tales were her favorite thing in the world. She'd read them all at the children's library, and she loved the ones with the lions, mermaids, and sorcerers more than the funny stories about girls and bunnies. When you read such things, at night you dare to go out of your room to the toilet, only if you light up the light in the whole apartment. And if some mysticism lives in their family's history, how did their loved ones hope to keep anything from her? Inga's mom was clearly the weaker link. If anyone was going to let it slip, it would be her. But Antonina only averted her eyes. "Yes," Grandma had begged. "Let's hope that everyone has already forgotten everything," said Inga's grandmother. "Does this thing bother you?" "No." "Then forget about it. And remember that you don't need to know everything." "But it's my ear." "We just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time," Mom sighed. She caught her grandmother's glance, stopped talking half a word, and as if cut off. No matter how much Inga pestered her, her mother never said a word on the subject. And only much later, having resorted to the unworthy technique of eavesdropping, Inga at least roughly understood what the matter was. Mother often came to her grandmother's house to sit up before going to bed. No matter how tired she was, but to talk, to discuss what had happened during the day, to complain about something, to ask for advice. It was more important than sleep. Sometimes my mother would sit down next to my grandmother on the edge of the sofa and whisper with her for so long that she would immediately fall asleep. And it was from the fragments of these whispers that Inga learned the story. Once in that old fortress on the mountain lived the rulers of the area. Imagine that. Where now only the wind walks through empty streets, where there are almost no houses left, not even ruins, and all the stones have been scattered. There used to be life. And thousands of people walk daily along the roads paved with stones. Water was brought up from the valley. There was a school, a market, and of course fortress walls. And the master of these places had unlimited power. His house should have been called a palace, but it was too much like a fortress. Blank walls, windows only in the courtyard. Was the largest and stood on the edge of the cliff, and inside. It was known, but no one could tell you about it in detail. There were dungeons. There was even a place where executions were carried out. It happened that those who had angered the master, or prisoners whom he hoped to exchange for a favorable exchange, were imprisoned here for 20 years. As the years passed, the fortress ceased to play its role. There was no need for people to hide behind its walls, and there were fewer and fewer and fewer inhabitants. It was a kind of a test to climb the mountains every day, to live near the sky, but to save water for everything else, to go down to the valley for every little thing. There remained old people and those who are faithful to tradition, who want to die close to their native hearth and be buried in the old cemetery next to their loved ones. There came a time when the master's family also left their home. Now the former rulers of the area lived down by the sea. Over the years they seemed to blend in with the rest of the people, but they did not get lost. There was something among them. There was something about the old lords. All members of the clan continued to consider themselves a superior race, those to whom the land belonged, along with all the people living on it. And necessarily one of the men of the family became, as they would say in Italy, the local don, the one who unofficially but really rules, who decides the question of life and death, to whom they go to bow and who takes cruel revenge on those who hurt his interests. They came to the sea then Inge was about 5 or 6 years old, and she liked such outings very much. Though her family did not make them very often, there was always either work or not enough money. But several times during the summer they still got in the car and went to the sea for a whole day to swim, sit on the shore, enjoy the favorite places, have lunch somewhere in a cafe, wander through the stores where they sell what they do not have in their town, and come home at nightfall to both mother and grandmother. And if any mysticism lived in their family's history, loved ones hoped to keep something from her. Mom was clearly the weaker link. If anyone had let it slip, it was her. But Emily only averted her eyes. "Let's hope everyone's forgotten," Jacob's grandmother pleaded. "Is that thing bothering you?" "No." "Then forget about it. And remember, you don't need to know everything." "But it's my ear." "We just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time," Mom sighed, catching her grandmother's gaze. She stopped talking halfway through the conversation, and just like that, she was cut off. No matter how much Amber pestered her, Mom never said another word on the subject. It wasn't until much later, when she resorted to the unseemly trick of eavesdropping, that Amber realized at least roughly what was going on. Mom often came to Grandma's house to sit up before bed, no matter how tired she was. Talking, discussing what had happened during the day, complaining about something, asking for advice. It was more important than sleep. Sometimes my mother would sit next to my grandmother on the edge of the sofa and whisper with her for so long that she would immediately fall asleep. And it was from the scraps of those whispers that Amber learned the story. The rulers of the area had once lived in that old fortress on the mountain. To think where now only the wind walks the empty streets, where there are almost no houses left, even the ruins, and those are scattered on the stones, before there was a boiling life. Thousands of people walked the stone-paved roads every day. Water was brought up from the valley. There was a school, a market, and of course fortress walls. And the master of these places had unlimited power. His house, which should have been called a palace, but it was too much like a fortress with blank walls and windows only to the courtyard, was the largest and stood on the very edge over the cliff. And inside, it was known, but no one could tell about it in detail, there were dungeons. There was even a place where executions were carried out. It happened that those who angered the master, or prisoners, whom he hoped to exchange favorably, were imprisoned here for 20 years. Over the years, the fortress ceased to play its role. People had no need to hide behind its walls, and there were fewer and fewer inhabitants. to live near the sky, but to save on all other water, to go down to the valley for every little thing it is a kind of a test. There remained old people, and those who were faithful to tradition, who wanted to die close to their native hearth and be buried in the old cemetery next to their relatives. There came a time when the host's family also left their home. Now the former rulers of the area lived down by the sea. Over the years they seemed to blend in with the rest of the people, but they did not get lost. There was something of the former rulers in the family. All of them continued to consider themselves a superior race, those to whom this land together with all the people living on it belonged. And necessarily one of the men of the family became, as they would say in Italy, the local don, the one who unofficially but truly rules, who decides matters of life and death, to whom they go to bow and who takes cruel revenge on those who hurt his interests. They came to the sea then. Amber was about 5 or 6 years old, and she loved such outings, though the household did not make them very often. There was always work or not enough money. But a few times during the summer they still got in the car and went to the sea for the day, to swim, sit on the shore, enjoy their favorite places, eat lunch in a cafe, wander through the stores that sell things they don't have in their town, and with darkness falling, return home to their mother and grandmother. That day couldn't help but stick in the memory. Amber was wearing a light blue plaid sundress. She was already badly tanned, her blonde hair tangled by the wind. The beach was less crowded than usual. The wind, carrying sand in the face, scared away the vacationers, and the waves on the sea had risen. But Amber ran along the edge of the shore, once on the ankle ran into the water, then retreated so that the wave did not cover her head, then snatched out of the water some particularly brightly colored pebble. Even her mother, who was far from any creativity, was admiring her daughter at this moment. If there was an artist or photographer here now, he would definitely admire how good Amber was. The girl didn't know that another couple was watching her father and son, who were in a tent nearby. Not everyone could afford to rent a beach house, so most of the tents were empty. But on this windy day, the father and son were more comfortable with the brightly colored fabric protecting them from the flying sand. Look, said a boy of about 12, pointing to Amber. There was something haughty in his oriental appearance and mannerisms. Her father looked at the girl and raised his eyebrows questioningly. So, well, you choose who you like, the boy explained. And don't tell me that's not true. I'm not a little kid anymore, I know. Who told you what? Father asked nonchalantly. Yes, I know about the girl who jumped out of the window and crashed, too. Father stretched, put his hands behind his head and said, looking at the sea. Well, you see, our wishes don't always end well. But that's for you. It's different for me, the boy objected. The father grinned. Son Emir was the only person who could speak to him like that. No, he hadn't been brought up in the Oriental way, where a child is allowed to do anything until a certain age. Emir knew his turns, knew how to behave properly if he had to. And yet he had no fear of his father, and deep down he was sure that he would go much further than him. Every now and then it would come out. Did you like her that much? I don't think she was pretty, Emir asked. How much do you understand? There was no embarrassment in his father's voice. He was just uncomfortable with the story. Well, you chose that one, and I choose this one. I like her. What are you going to do with her? Nothing for now. Let her live. When she's old enough, I'll take her back to our place. You're like a Turk. They used to kidnap their brides. My father's tone was mocking, but there was genuine warmth in it. I think it was more slaves, the boy said, surprised. Amber had been running up and down the beach, and now she wanted to swim. She was already pretty good in the water, but since her father wasn't with them, her grandmother made her wear a child's inflatable vest that fastened in the front with a drawstring. Amber ran to beg for permission to swim and was animatedly telling her grandmother something, gesticulating. Paul, his father, called to the gray-haired man who always accompanied them. He immediately bent down to his master. Do you know who they are? From their appearance, it seems that if they have come, they have not come from far away. Yes, Herman Yefimovich. You know, we'd like to secure the girl for the future, so to speak. Pavel didn't point directly at Amber, but made a certain movement with his eyes. I see your point. Emir smirked. He realized that he had allowed himself more than usual, had behaved even brazenly, and was quite sure that his father would refuse him. But he had chosen a good day, and his father was in a good mood. And in general, it doesn't hurt to check the boundaries of permissible from time to time. Grandma and Mom were shocked when Paul and the makeup girls from the beauty parlor showed up at their house in the evening. Chewing gum in her mouth, one of them pierced Amber's ear and stuck an earring in it. The maiden, however, was apparently not evil. She chatted with the girl and said that they bring 2-year-olds to her, and in general there is nothing to talk about. 1, 2 and done. That earring is very pretty. It's a stone. Ruby, the stone of love. And it has a tiny little seal on it that you can see if you look closely. The family tried to be indignant at first, to say that it was out of the question, but Paul repeated twice something that frightened everyone, and hinted that misunderstandings with this man could end badly. After all, taking Amber away now is the easy part, and there's little the police can do to help to everyone. The girl will just go missing. It happens, and trying to hide or take her away isn't an option either. If you get the urge, they'll get you from under the ground. Don't cry. Humanly speaking, I understand. I'll tell you what, no one will touch you now. Live as you have lived, raise your little girl. So much that all this will be forgotten quickly, and no one will ever remember you or that earring. But for some reason they put it on try not to cry. Mom, who was scared out of her wits, wiped away her tears with the palm of her hand. Paul shrugged. Well, what can you do when you're talking about a child? A ring or a bracelet? The baby is growing, the jewelry will quickly become tight. She'll lose the tip. An earring is a reliable thing. Did the slave owners think so too? Grandma put it in. Her voice was creaky for some reason. Stepfather Paul looked at her carefully. Well, you got it right. Once again I say, I'm almost certain that everything will be fine. With that he bowed out. That's the phrase the relatives clung to. If you sit quietly, do not try to fight, argue. If you do not get on the road, and look, it will pass. And it was hard to imagine a quieter life than the family led in the following years. Their town is small, less than 30,000 people live here, and it's 24 kilometers from the sea, so even in the summer there is no such pandemonium as on the coast. Mostly those who are interested in history come here. After all, on the maps of this place appeared in the 16th century. And there are plenty of real antiquities here. Caves along the lawn, in the mountains and rocks, where the first settlers huddled so densely that in some places the slopes of the mountains resemble honeycombs. But if you don't go where the tourists take you, the town is quiet and sleepy. Narrow streets, blank stone fences. That's the fence Amber grew up behind. And then when she reached out to people herself when she started working at the museum, the terrible incident was somehow forgotten and erased from her memory. It's been too many years. It's definitely forgotten now. Amber and her red mark. Her mother secretly followed the fate of the owner, knew that he lived abroad for several years. And when his father came back, his son was still out there somewhere. Yes, he studied in Europe. Mother knew that the master's distant ancestors had once owned a fortress, and now he had built himself a house before which the old fortress was only a pale reflection, a real castle on the seashore. And grandmother used to say that he sits there, God forgive him, like a spider to which the threads of everything dark, gloomy, illegal in their land are drawn. And the guy eventually came back. Why? Why wasn't he in Europe? His father had decided to gradually bring him up to speed, to hand over the reins of power. I just hoped Amber never met him. Amber would take the guests in her old car. Usually the less discerning ones would agree, and she'd drive them around the sites. Or her clients did not agree to drive anything but their own foreign cars. And then in the agreed place sat in their car, and then already took on the role of a guide. Today's job was a little more unusual than before. She had to pick up these guys right at the station. They'd arrived in a matter of days. Sports competitions, a tight schedule, and they wished for such a program. They'd get off the train and go on a tour. And then it's back to the hotel. What's Amber's main concern? That the group was small. As always, she never took more than 4 or 5 people, usually less. And the money had already been transferred to her card. So she stood on the platform and watched the cars slowly pass by. She recognized her clients at once, 3 young guys. One look at them and immediately diagnosed them as basketball players, and an older man with them. Even his whiskers are graying. The guys must have been inspired by the fact that their guide was such a young girl, But Amber, with a restrained smile, responded to the jokes at the attempted flirting, and then she got everyone in the car so that the oldest in the group was next to her in the front seat. The part of the road ahead was boring, through the steppe. Sometimes cab drivers ask passengers to talk to me, or I'm afraid I'll doze off at the wheel. But Amber was in no danger of that. After all, there were the steppe yaks and their battles, their chiefs, their mounds. Even here she managed to tell fascinating stories, poured the bird, and listened that tourists almost sighed with regret when the sea showed in the distance. After all, that meant the end of the story. She spoke to herself, looking in the mirror at the man sitting next to her. He reminded her of an elephant. Maybe it's called a Roman profile. But it seemed to Amber that his forehead went so smoothly, without curves, into his nose that it looked like a short elephant trunk. Amber thought back to last winter. She'd gotten lucky with an order then. She'd patronized a group flying in from St. Petersburg like chickens, and they hadn't wanted to let her go. They asked her to celebrate New Year's Eve with them at one of the most luxurious recreation centers. This, in addition to the fee for excursions. Those days were strange. Here, in their climate, where it rarely snows, it happens that you cannot wait for the whole winter. But then the New Year's week was snowy, and tourists did not know what kind of entertainment to think up. They skated on the artificial ice, and the bathhouse, that's for sure, and the equestrian club, and some even ordered a helicopter. And of course the New Year's celebration itself, when in a cafe stylized as a Russian terem, set the tables and until morning was to continue the fun and dancing. And Amber then ran away. She served her part with the band all evening in the arena and escaped to the cottage where they had put her up. One of the guests went after her. It was a dark-haired, pleasant, middle-aged man. He brought champagne and brought no hindsight. It was just that he was an introvert and didn't want to spend the rest of the night in a crowd. Better to sit in the living room with this nice girl, look at the fire in the fireplace and through the panoramic windows at the snow-covered, garland-lit forest, drink champagne and talk. Igor was married and regretted that it turned out so that his Olga could not come. Suddenly swamped with things at work, and the vouchers were already bought, and Olga kicked him out to rest for 2. And that's when Igor told Amber, "I think that every person is like some animal. And you? I'm like a dog, I guess." From Amber's point of view, he looked like a raccoon, short in stature, graceful, with deep-set and dark eyes. But Amber had remained silent out of politeness. But now she remembered him, because elephant was a very subtle definition. This time she drove the guests around almost until the evening. She showed them the main resort town. The local nice went aboard a sailing ship with them. It used to be filmed a lot in movies, but now it was a bar. They stood on the observation decks, drank water from the spring, drowned in legends, and bought as a souvenir burlap bags with fragrant herbs. The final point was a restaurant where they served fish that was still swimming in the sea in the morning. She was treated to local wines. Then Amber had to take her guests to the doorstep of the hotel. She didn't drink much wine, but the guys got pretty drunk. They felt like they were friends forever. And they asked Emily to come cheer them on at the competition tomorrow. "Can I ask you a favor?" the older man asked. Amber recognized him. His name was Jason, and he wasn't a coach or some kind of chaperone, just a friend of one of the boys' fathers, and he'd come along for the ride. She raised her eyebrows at him now, smiling welcomingly, but she really didn't like these unexpected requests. There was no telling what would pop into her head. "Amber, don't you take me to the fortress?" Kyle interrupted, and after the third drink he decided to switch to you with her. "No, I can't go to the fortress." "Why not?" Kyle's voice trailed off. You had to listen to him to make out the words. "Grandmother won't let me go." Kyle looked at her in amazement. "It's dangerous. Caves crumbling. Underground mazes. She won't let me in." "Well, what do you want?" Amber explained. Like her, Jason hadn't had much to drink that night. "There's a Gregory Evans living here. He's the landlord." Jason began slowly, "and they say he's built himself a castle that would make an English queen jealous. I'd like to take a closer look at it. I understand about private property and all that. But will you take me to a place where I can get a good view of the castle? I know it's over the top, but I'll pay." Amber stopped the car where few people would. Only someone who knows every rock, every ledge in the area. The road was narrow. A steep slope to the left, the sea below. Here, a dense forest. But at the sight of it, Amber remembered the marshes. The green and lush crowns gave the deceptive impression of a carpet. It looked like moss from afar, but you couldn't step on it. You'd fall through. Onto the right rose-steep cliffs. Such cliffs can be climbed only with mountaineering equipment. No stranger would park here. But Amber found a small ledge. She parked her car so it wouldn't get in the way of anyone driving by. It wasn't a busy road, though it led to nowhere, to a small village with no sights, nothing of interest to tourists. Here Jason started. I'll show you the path. Amber led him to a little noticeable path that went steeply downward, but still allowed him to get down to the sea. Divers used to love this place, Amber explained. They used to have a different road so you could drive a car to the water. These guys always have their gear with them. You know, tents, stuff like that. It's a lot of cargo. And then when they built the castle, they blocked the road. There was even a court case in the end. You know, between the people have a right and private property won. Some people tried to give a damn. Mostly not the people who live here, but the people who come here every year to snorkel. The water here is clear, and it feels like you're not swimming, but floating in the blue sky like an angel. While someone tried to ride like they used to. True, they chose a time when it was usually quiet early morning, late evening. They hoped no one would notice them. But people invariably stood on the road, guards, you wouldn't believe it, with real weapons, automatic rifles or something like that. All kinds of camouflage on their chests. So we realized it was serious, so we stopped trying. There's still this trail, it's off to the side. It was laid by the most stubborn. There's a forest almost all the way to the sea. You can go down and snorkel. It's a little awkward to climb back, but you can see the castle from there. Jason stared at her for a few seconds. Amber couldn't tell at once what she saw in that look of gratitude, but it was clearly something else. Thank you, Amber. Anything further, he held out the money to her, but the girl only took one of the bills out of his hand. She was always honest about her work and didn't take tips. How will you get out of here? Hitchhike. There's a hitchhiker every half hour or an hour or less, Jason shrugged. It was a small thing to him. Let me wait for you. My mom says the owner's so reclusive because the 90s aren't over for him. No, girl, Jason said softly. It all started earlier, much earlier, and thank you for the offer. But I'd like to be alone, and thank you also for the fact that without you, I wouldn't have found this path. He nodded his goodbye and started down the path, recognizing it for what it was. In some places, he had to hold on to tree roots to keep his balance. Sometimes the path was blocked by ravines, into which one had to descend and then climb down their slippery clay slopes. Really, you had to love diving to come here. Besides, whatever Jason was up to, it wouldn't be worth the delay. It was getting dark soon, and darkness in the south fell quickly, almost in an instant. It must have been about 20 minutes when the shore came into view. The forest had receded, and he saw a narrow strip of large pebbles. He also saw the castle. It rose up on his right hand and seemed to rise out of the sea, though it was built on a low cliff. It was built of stone of gray, but of such a dark shade that now in the evening light the castle seemed black. Some historian, architect, or art critic would have been tempted to argue that the castle was built in accordance with the traditions of the people who had lived here for centuries. It had nothing in common with Gothic and with those castles and palaces that could not protect their owners from enemies but were works of art in themselves. No, the man who built such a thing thought first of all of his own safety. Blank walls, windows as narrow as loopholes, gates as tall as 3 men. How much evil had to be done to be so afraid of retribution? And Jason remembered the morning Emily had disappeared. He sat at his computer early. He worked best in the morning hours. His head wasn't so clear after that. Emily brought him coffee, came up behind him. All he saw was her hand with the inexpensive metal bracelet. She was placing a steaming cup in front of him. Then he felt the touch of her lips on his hair. Emily kissed him lightly. I'm off to the market. Can you believe it's all over? Not even breakfast, she said. Engrossed in his work, he didn't realize until 10 o'clock when he felt hungry. Emily hadn't returned by then. It was unbearably sickening to think of what had followed. Desperate searching and terror in his soul from the first minute. Somehow he had been certain from the beginning that something very bad, terribly bad, had happened that could not be undone. Emily couldn't get lost, couldn't hang out with her friends. She didn't have any friends here either. Go to a movie or go swimming. Trouble happened. Emily was found about 2 weeks later on a beach just like this, by the water. And there was no way of knowing how she could have gotten there. She was lying on the rocks, a broken doll in tattered clothes. And it was only her face that her death had made completely calm. The police, who up to that point had been honestly searching for the young woman, suddenly led further investigation, as if they were certain of the only theory. And it was hardly Jason's fault. "You must have had a fight," the investigator insinuated. "So she left. She'd taken her own life, as they say." Jason stared at her with shocked eyes. He couldn't even speak. He was at a loss for words. Emily was the most precious thing in his life. What would he be without her? Quite possibly just carelessness. The investigator retreated a little. The grounds here were beautiful. She wanted to get a closer look. The rocks under her feet crumbled, and she took off. "Are you saying that right from the market with a heavy bag without saying anything to anyone?" Emily went far away to admire the views. "And that's not bullshit to you?" The investigator shrugged. "Well, it's not like a woman can think of anything." It wasn't until later, asking everyone himself, that Jason found a young merchant who told him. "I saw Emily being pushed into the car. It happens to us," the trader said, averting his eyes. "Usually these women come back after a while. You were just unlucky." From the same man, Jason had learned about the all-powerful owner of this place. It's no use going to the police with this. He's not only got it in his pocket, they're scared shitless of him. And as you know, I wouldn't be a witness. Life, is more precious. You're already attracting a lot of attention. You'll come home one day and his men will tell you to leave immediately, or they'll find you. Just like that, on the beach. Or maybe they won't find you at all. Wrap it up. You can't fight a crowbar, as they say. And Jason somehow knew Emily hadn't been killed. I mean, not literally killed. She'd gotten a minute and either tried to escape but failed or just threw herself from a height. She had never been afraid of heights in the mountains. One had to watch out for others all the time, keep an eye on her. And heights had done her one last favor. It had saved her from something Emily couldn't bear. Jason had taken her advice, but not because he'd decided to accept it, to forgive it, to forget it. It was just that the master's power here was absolute now. An armor in which no vulnerability could be found. But if you wait, if you put your whole life into waiting for your hour, your minute, your one and only minute, that chance would come sooner or later. Amber was waiting for him by the car. She was squatting on her haunches, picking through small stones, looking for clear quartz shards. It was a habit of hers. "Let's go," she said, getting up and shaking her palms off her shorts. "I knew you'd come out of the dark. I waited." He was genuinely surprised. "How could I leave you?" And yet the light was almost out. And the first thing Amber did when she got behind the wheel was turn on the headlights. "Mom, let's get out of here. I'm scared for some reason." Amber didn't expect those words to come out of her mouth. She'd known about her master her whole life, as long as she could remember. And she'd been to these places near his castle many times. But today this stranger, so strange, so a little like an elephant, by his mere presence stirred her. Now she had a premonition of bad things to come. Like an animal senses an earthquake coming. Her mother had just fed Amber some fried potatoes, poured her some tea, and returned to her knitting. "Where are we going?" she asked. There was a certain irritation in her voice. She knew Amber must have known that they were trapped and had nowhere to go. There wasn't a penny to spare in the family and no relatives or acquaintances willing to take them in. And how do you leave home? It's the only thing they got. Mom lived here for years without ever leaving. She was afraid of everything. She had never been abroad. She was afraid of foreign passports, a foreign language, incomprehensible money, which was incomprehensible how much it would be in rubles. At the first store you would be left without a penny. And my mother was afraid of her country. 2 trains with drunken shift workers. Airplanes that crashed, pimps at train stations, swindlers and thieves. "If I go to my dad's?" Amber asked. "There's almost a direct train there, with only one change at the very end." "Don't even think about it." Mom jumped up. "He really needs you. He's already got a son and a daughter. Let him take care of them." "I'm not saying move in with him," Amber corrected her mom gently. "Just in the same town as him. Maybe he'll give me a job and then I'll get an apartment. I'm an adult, Mom, and you're wrong to say he doesn't want me. He's been sending me money for my birthday all these years, you know it. It's in your book." Grandma looked at Mom with an expression that clearly said, "See, I was right," and Mom was embarrassed. But she quickly found a clue. "No, no, no, no. I'm not letting you on a train across the country." "I had an acquaintance," Grandma said melancholically. She was older than me. As a child, she survived in the trenches of Stalingrad. Then she graduated from a fishery technical school and was sent to Sakhalin. She was small in stature, with a point, black eyes, and a big bow in her braid. She traveled with geologists to Vladivostok on a train across the country on the third shelf somewhere, because there were not enough seats. Then by boat to the island, and worked there as a foreman at the combine. Her mother's eyes darted, fingers begging her to stop this conversation, not to lead Amber astray. Amber went to the fortress. It was a kind of place of power for her. The ruins had been closed off from tourists for a while permanently. The risk of accidents had become too great, and the caves and underground passages had to be reinforced to prevent an unexpected collapse. But there was no place in their neighborhood where Amber didn't know the secret paths. Leaving the car at the foot of the hill, she began to climb up the mountain. And the town died out. Here and there remnants of towers, crooked streets half erased by time, a cemetery. Caves, roofed in the rocks, long ago deserted dwellings, debris, stones, dust, and ashes, where the eye finds no joy. 2 or 3 families, like shadows, wander among the bare walls, but barracks for them are native hearths and the temple of their fathers. A black car, over which smooth circles, soaring, draws an eagle on the mountain heights. These lines, written long ago, really came to life here, in these ancient walls, although now it was no longer possible to meet even 2 or 3 families here. Amber had spent the night here once. Of course, withheld from her loved ones, not on a bet, and not with a young man. It was just that since childhood she had felt her belonging to this ancient fortress, her kinship with those who lived here. It was well known about her host's ancestors that they owned the very house of which only ruins remained. But Amber knew from somewhere that her great-grandparents had come from this area. Maybe one of them had been a potter or a small merchant who went down to town every day, set up shop. Or maybe there isn't even dust left of their house now. But their souls, they were still here. These people, generation after generation, had survived here, where every drop of water was precious, and where even grass grew so sparsely on the sun-hot rocks. Survived, fought off enemies, and stayed here after the master's family left. Which meant this place was theirs by right, not stolen from them by legal violence. Amber told her friend at home that she'd stay the night, but she went up to the fortress in the late afternoon and found a spot near the crossroads. There were bushes of dried wormwood poking through the paving stones. There was still a stone arch over one of the roads. Nearby were 2 nations' ancient temples. One simpler, smaller, trimmed in wood, the other larger, with heavy columns, with doors that in Amber's memory were perpetually locked, though she peered through the windows, trying to see what was inside. The sunset made the fortress an absolutely fantastic sight, and it was particularly vivid itself. It seemed that Amber had never seen such vivid colors of the sky, rich purples, golds, and purples. It was the hour when that which was unimaginable and fabulous in the daytime awakens all the otherworldly power whose breath is in the air in a way that cannot be put into words. Amber sat here until dawn. At times she was sure she could make out faint light shadows, swift or slow, but she felt no fear. She waited for someone to speak to her, or to give her some sign. Above her head were large stars, like grains of shining salt. Every now and then a long streak of a meteorite could be seen. Amber remembered her childhood. She'd been given a little Umka telescope. And it had been a real shock for her to see for herself, with her own eyes, that the moon was not a golden disk, so natural in the night sky and in pictures that it was almost unnoticeable. No, the moon is a stone ball, riddled with lunar craters. And it hangs in the black void of space. It's one thing to read about it, but it's another to see it. It took her a long time to catch a glimpse of meteors, even though her grandmother had told her, "There's a bright one coming." When Amber finally saw the flying stars, she remembered her father's hands as he struck a match to light a cigarette. And she thought maybe God was doing it up there in the sky. Then her legs got stiff, and she stood up, thinking that every step she took would make a thudding sound on the paving stones beneath her feet. But she walked quite silently, like a spirit, reached the temple and stroked one of the columns. It was a movement of which she was not aware to herself. And then she walked down the alley under the archway, and inhaling the bitter odor of wormwood, thought that this was what the stars smelled like. She did not go down into the dungeon, though she had been there before. But she had not brought a flashlight, and without it she was afraid of tripping on the steps, stumbling, falling somewhere. So she walked outside the fortress walls and went to the tomb, the obelisk above which was particularly high on the mountainside. Amber knew that a very young girl was buried here. She had died while even younger than Amber was now. A girl from a wealthy family had carried water to the fortress during the siege. Skinny as she was, she managed to slip between the bars of the fence. She made the journey again and again with the heavy burden, and her heart failed her. The bird girl. Then Amber met the dawn next to the grave, but there was still no fear. On the contrary, the feeling that she was not alone was growing in her. Of course, Amber never said a word at home about her nighttime escapade. Mom would have been heartbroken, and Grandma would have freaked out in hindsight. But many times after that, Amber had come here in times of need to regain her inner strength and composure. And now she sat in complete silence for a long time on the grass at the edge of the road. Only the wind ruffled her hair and occasionally sang in the narrow streets like the distant sound of strings. Today she was driving a new group of husband, wife, and 2 children. The family didn't want to buy shared excursions. With children, you can never guess what if they get carsick, have to stop the car, and what if they get thirsty or have to go back. And the program the mother and father asked to adjust to the children. The girl was 8 and the boy was 5. Not tiring, not hot, interesting, and a place to get drunk and eat. Amber took them to the Museum of Fairy Tales and walked with her guests along the paths of the park for a long time, talking about fairy tale characters as well as an experienced guide. She worried while the children wondered and marveled to their heart's content to have their pictures taken. Then they had a snack at the cafe and had to finish the day at the observation deck. We had to give the adults a chance to admire the beauty of the area too. For Amber, the main charm was the sea always alive, with its brightest holiday colors blue, 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 green, and the vegetation still below. Drowning in the greenery of the southern city was very nice. It was a weekday, and this observation deck was not one of the most famous. So when they'd come here, Amber had figured and had no doubt already that they'd be alone on the platform. But at the very last moment they were cut off by a car, a white Cherokee Jeep. It cut them off so unexpectedly and brazenly that it could have been bad. Amber almost drove off the road, and that would have been a disaster. Serpentine roads everywhere, steep slopes everywhere. She felt an icy dread. Not so much for herself, but for the strangers in the car. Damn it. She almost never argued with other drivers, never got into arguments. And though almost always, if something happened on the road, it wasn't her fault, Amber swallowed the chicken that you can't let those women drive and the brainless blonde just as long as they'd leave her alone. But now, when she saw that the Jeep had stopped near the same lot where they were headed, Amber couldn't help herself. She slammed the door and strode toward the black car, taking the distance between them in 4 strides. "Are you crazy?" She lashed out at the guy who stepped on the ground. "Do you realize you almost got us all killed?" And she faltered. Because this Ambo looked at her without the slightest sense of guilt, with such a slight smirk, as if not a person, but a bug he got on the road, which he was about to crush with his foot. And then she recognized him. His portrait was not published in the newspapers, but she often found references to him and his photographs on the internet. Too often the owner's son was involved in all sorts of stories. And usually in a car he'd race with his friends at breakneck speed through the city at night and hit someone, or he'd get into a fight he'd provoked, or there'd be an absolutely scandalous orgy party, for no one had the courage to call it anything else. Resentment struggled with fear in Amber. Especially as it turned out, Emir wasn't traveling alone in the car. He never rode alone, and 2 of his friends of the same age and perhaps even stronger build were now standing beside him, grinning just as unkindly. Amber remembered the earring. She wanted to see if it covered her hair, but didn't dare. She could only hope that the curly blonde strands hid her earlobes, but it was a futile hope. "I remember you," Emir said, ignoring Amber's anger, ignoring her mood. "Were you the one slapping bare heels on the beach back then? You couldn't forget me either. You're still wearing my sign." He looked at her like a landlord coming home to check on his possessions. "You were such a little girl then. I thought you'd never grow up to be anything good. But you turned out to be pretty good." The tourists started getting out of the car. Amber should have gone with them, but she stood stiffly as the owner's son walked around her, looking at her from every angle. Looking at her from every angle. "Where do you live? What do you care? What do you really care?" Because you're coming with us now. I'm not. Who's going to ask you? The smirk got even wider. Amber knew it was useless to yell. There was no one around to stand up for her but the father of the family. Still, as she was dragged to the car, she cast desperate glances at the family. Unless these people were afraid, if they could tell. You didn't see anything one of the customers approached them, after the Jeep door had already slammed shut and swallowed Amber. Is that clear? But how are we going to get out of here? We don't even know where we are. The man didn't dare say anything, the woman decided. And his voice wasn't shaking. Shuttle you'll catch. With these words, the guy got into the car and the Jeep sped off so sharply that it almost drove over the tourists' legs. They barely had time to bounce, and a few more minutes coughing because such a dust rose. The adults were so impressed by the experience that they could not immediately begin to talk, although the children, and break them, trying to understand what was happening. It was late in the evening when Amber's mother came to the hotel where the family was staying. She was distraught and found her daughter's notebook, where Amber had written down the schedule of her excursions and the phone numbers of her clients. Only she, this crying woman, not the police, had dared to tell the husband and wife what had happened on the observation deck. But they didn't remember the license plate number, saying they were in shock. They didn't care. And they stood firm on that. They couldn't give us a good description of the guy. A big guy in a black t-shirt with some friends with him. And then they watched through the window as the small figure of a woman, covering her face with her hands, went away. Into the night. Just don't throw me into a thorn bush, the phrase popped into Amber's head. And it somehow became the only thing she could cling to like a lifeline. They'd been driving for about 10 minutes now. Amber was sandwiched in the back seat between two thugs. She tried to ignore their dirty jokes. She was the only one who needed to scratch out a ghostly chance at salvation. "Are you taking me to the castle?" Amber asked briefly, still ignoring Emir's friends. "Why? Have you wanted to go there for a long time?" "Really? Not only a tour guide, but also a call girl. I haven't seen all the clients' houses yet." "You haven't." "That's true. You guys don't let anyone in. You're like spiders in a web. But there's always a way out." "And what is your way out?" "I assure you, the gate is like a door to a safe. A flea can't get through. You won't escape, will you?" "There is a way out. I've already escaped through your father's window. I'm not afraid of death. Don't think about chewing through the bars with your teeth." He nodded at her wrist. Something had changed. Almost imperceptibly, but Amber felt it. "Aren't you afraid of anything?" Emir asked. The iron confidence and mockery were gone from his voice. "Why, nothing." Amber spoke in a deliberately harsh tone that she had never spoken before in her life. "I'm afraid of the fortress. They say there are ghosts there in droves. They step on each other's toes. I had a friend stay there for a night on a dare and she nearly went mad. I'm not afraid of that lock thing you've got going on." "Yeah, that's a good idea." One of the guys came to life. "It's under reconstruction. None of the people are there. Let's stick her in one of those holes. She'll sit there for a day or two and then we'll take her back. It'll be silk. It's better than if that rabid thing starts gnawing on her own veins. Or your throat." Emir thought for a minute, and then became lively. "Come on, let's do it." He had a premonition of unusual entertainment. There was almost nothing left unavailable to him in this world. He was already satiated. But to shake the family history, for his ancestors had put their enemies, or perhaps captives, in those dreadful caves. It was tempting to do as they did. This fool won't run away. Even if there is a small window in such a cave, it is very narrow. You can't fit through it. And if you turn around, you'll find yourself under a cliff. Then all you can do is throw yourself down, just to be sure. And if that crazy woman throws herself down, no one will ever think anything of Emir. It's not the same old story with Dad. The owner could do almost anything, but it took a lot of money to cover up that old story. And here's a careless girl climbing a mountain and getting killed. It's her own fault. But Emir had no doubt the girl would never get out of those underground passages. Jason bought a hunting rifle, according to all the rules, having collected the documents and having a hunting ticket. But it was not worth looking for it afterward in the company of those who wanted to shoot a bird or kill a boar. Afterward, he laundered the trophies. Sharing tales, Jason retreated into the woods. Loneliness had long been his shadow. his second self, and he'd come back without any booty. He had another goal in mind, to preserve his sniper skills and that inner focus that would so easily be lost in the shooting range. Jason needed that inner determination and willingness to pass the point of no return as much as he needed a steady and accurate hand. He would go far away where no other hunters could get to him and where no one could hear the sound of the shot. Jason would only shoot at a target until he felt he was ready for anything that might come out of his scheme. All these years he'd spent money on himself more than sparingly, royalties set aside. And by the time it was decided it was time, he had enough saved up to buy a black market sniper rifle. If Amber's mother kept an eye on her master's life, not for any particular purpose, more out of caution, she sighed in relief when she heard he was leaving the country. Jason, on the other hand, knew exactly what he was waiting for. Even the strongest enemy has a moment of weakness, a moment when he opens up. He had to wait patiently for that moment, not to miss it. When Amber led him to the closest place to the castle, Jason realized once again that it was useless to look for luck here. The castle was too far away from people and too well protected. It wasn't worth trying to get to someone hidden behind its walls. There were other options to consider: access roads, places in the city where the owner occasionally visited. Jason knew he would wait patiently, that he would lay his life on it and wait. After all, what would happen to himself afterward was of no concern to him. He didn't think about the consequences, and frankly didn't care about them. But he realized how carefully he had to think over every step, so that his life's work would not remain unfinished. At the hotel, he took a room on the second floor with a low-hanging balcony. It wasn't always easy for an outsider to get onto the front of the building, but it wouldn't be a problem for him to get out of here himself if the need arose. Jason didn't know how long he'd be here, so he paid for 2 weeks for now. He'd see how long it would take. He went to the market where Emily had gone on her last day. He needed to get in tune with her. From a common sense point of view, it was inexplicable. But the chance we get often defies all logic. Over the years, the market has become almost unrecognizable. New pavilions and signs have appeared. But this place was revived as early as it is now, although most of the resort visitors were still asleep. Traders were already laying out their goods on the stalls. There had once been merchants in the ancient fortress too, and they had come down every day to set up their shops. Jason remembered that there had been competition then, and he'd been quietly discouraged from taking cucumbers from Peter or apricots from Ahmet. He waters his garden with cesspool waste. Fertilizer, you'll want, he was told. But how could one pass by golden curd, velvety pure apricots, purple grapes, or cucumbers just plucked from the bed? It was impossible to think of anything else but the blissful satisfaction of hunger. Now the early customer was welcome, and the first saleswoman grabbed Jason with her chatter in her hands, which were already placing the clear yellow plums on the scales. But as he counted out the money, Jason froze, listening to the conversation of the women next door with their wares. That's how that girl got stolen and taken away in broad daylight. The mother's ready to go to the noose. Yeah, I know that family. The last thing I thought was that they'd be the ones to get into this kind of trouble. Always so quiet, always the first to say hello when they meet. That girl Amber is either 18 or 19 years old. And why her? Well, she's pretty, I'll give her that. How did you find out? The mother, it turns out, kept it a secret from everyone that her girl had a crush on this boy years ago. Now Amber hasn't come home, and the mother's looking for her, because the police are notoriously unreliable. People who saw it all happen, who saw her being dragged into the car, have come forward. But well, if there are witnesses, will the police let it go this time too? So what witnesses? They all got scared, quickly packed up and left. And now they'll have to find them. And the mothers will say it's all a fabrication, said the full-figured shopkeeper, shifting the apricots so carelessly that the soft sides of the apricots were pitted by her fingers. By God, I think I'm going mad. This is medieval. The master is the Lord. It's always been like that in my lifetime. And it will go on my son has grown up there, said another. And what is your mother not afraid to tell now? Isn't it too late for her to realize it? What has she got to lose? The only hope now is that everybody will know about it. Maybe then that scum will be ashamed to go all the way. He'll let her go in the end. After he's played with her, he'll let her go. When did this happen? Jason asked, forgetting about the change the peddler was counting out for him. I found out yesterday, the full-figured woman said. That's the kind of thing we get. You come here like you're in paradise for a vacation, but not everything is so peaceful and quiet. Who can give me the address of this family? Jason asked. please. Do you want to help one guest? Well, help. They've always lived poor, and Mom's sure going to need the money now. I don't know whether she's at home or in the hospital. How much medicine costs, can you imagine? Tell me the address, I'll remember it. It wasn't 20 minutes before Jason knocked on the gate of the house on the quiet street. The gate was 3 boards, the brown paint peeling off long ago. There was no bell, but even a delicate knock was enough for the unlocked gate to open by itself. Jason followed the path through the garden to the house. 2 women were sitting on the open veranda. One, very old, slouched in a chair with armrests and red eyes. The other, younger, stood toward him, clamping her hands over her mouth, apparently in no doubt what news he had brought. And Jason's heart ached in a way it hadn't in years. It was as if he'd been transported back to the hour he'd learned of Emily's death. Jason raised his palms in a soothing gesture. I didn't bring bad news. I want to learn something and maybe help. But you're not the police, said the younger one, the mother. And there was more affirmation in it than questioning intonation. Jason realized she was already there. Already tried to raise everyone's ears. It didn't work. She'd been told something like, wait, a young girl's been out for 3 days, ran away, decided not to let you know. Now mother and grandmother were hitting this uncertainty like birds against glass. Their hearts were about to fail. I'm not the police, he said, and he could hear the change in his voice. I understand that you know who your Amber is in whose hands, and that this man has had his eye on her for a long time. That is correct. And a picture of your daughter I'd like to see, if I may. The mother shrugged her shoulders shakily. The shawl thrown over them, apparently grabbed from the bed, didn't help. She went quickly into the room and soon returned with a red-bound album, an old album, the kind they used to glue pictures of children from birth many years ago. Her mother opened the album to the last page, stroked the picture of a pretty blonde-haired girl with big, clear eyes. There was nothing of the modern girl in her. She looked like an easy victim who had fallen into the golden hands of Cochet, who would take her wherever he wanted. I'll hire a hitman, mother said. Sell everything we have, this house, everything. And we'll hire someone to kill that rotter at last. Tanya, Grandma raised her voice. The thing to think about right now was how to help Amber. No such thoughts just yet. Mother dropped her head on the table and cried with her grief. That's right, it had all come to pass. It was as if she were standing over Amber's coffin. It was impossible to question her now, and Jason got the story from his grandmother. She, too, had changed in the last 24 hours. If Jason had known her before, he would have seen how she had aged. Now she was an old woman sitting in front of him, immersed in herself, a little crazy. But he didn't know what to say to both of them, because now all he had to do was risk everything, and no one knew what the consequences of his move would be. What can you do for her? Again, it was not the mother who asked, but the grandmother. The mother was still unable to speak coherently. I'll try to find out where she is, and then it will depend on the circumstances. One more question, please. I know this is difficult for you, but I need to know. You know Amber best. If she escaped, where would she go? Would she go back home, or would she try to hide somewhere? Would she run to the police, or would she go far away without saying a word to anyone? Mother raised her head. At these words, she and grandmother exchanged glances. The fortress, grandmother said. It had always been the place dearest to her. A place of strength, as they say. She would run there for comfort, and you can hide there so that no one can find you. It's a veritable underground labyrinth. You know that ancient fortress in the cave city. It's undergoing restoration. But somehow I don't doubt that Amber would run there. Jason closed his eyes a little, signaling that he'd taken note. Why don't I go there myself? His mother jumped up. What if she's really gone and is hiding there? I'll go and call. Don't even think about it, he said sharply. Nowhere, not a single step now, so as not to hurt your daughter or yourself. Your job is to wait. Do you realize how hard it is to wait and do nothing? Have you ever been through anything like this, been in our shoes? The last thing Jason would do in his life is tell Amber's grief-stricken relatives about Emily. Because they still had a chance. There was hope. She didn't. Amber really knew the underground labyrinths well. Of course, she couldn't go through all of them. Many of the passages were simply blocked, and no one was going to clear them. Cave vaults were crumbling, their corridors becoming impassable. She was risking everything, too. The company she'd fallen into could do anything to her first. There were no witnesses, and then dump her in one of the stone bags to make her go mad. No water, no food, and utter despair. Or even pushed off a cliff. Then again, who would see? But she was just beaten, tastefully, heartily. And then they pushed her into that death chamber that the tour guides liked to scare tourists with. Apparently, Emir and his accomplices did not know these places so well, and this cave was known to everyone. Some said that they could put a prisoner here for decades, setting a completely insane ransom for him. Others said it was the place of execution, and they described in vivid color exactly how. Now, the narrow entrance was closed by an iron grate, but Emir, it turned out, had a key to it. He must have inherited it from his great-grandfather. This is where you'll sit. Amber was shoved back so hard that she couldn't keep her feet and fell to her knees on the stone floor. Maybe we'll stop by again tomorrow, Emir smirked, savoring every word and trying to catch the look of horror in her eyes. He didn't wait. The day after tomorrow, then. We have to bring you water, poor thing. But we'll only give it to you if you ask for it very nicely. Meet us on your knees with your mouth open, advised one of his buddies. Cheeky. Malnourished, covered in rashes. Amber couldn't let her hatred suffocate her now. Make her do something rash. She walked to the back of the cave, her cell, settled on the stone ledge, wrapped her arms around her knees, and stared out the window. Are you getting into character? Kyle Smith wondered. Like, go ahead and practice with the ghosts until we get there. They left, laughing, deliberately loudly discussing the next time they'd visit her. What would they do to her then? Amber didn't move until her acute hearing stopped picking up the sound of their footsteps and voices. There was the sound of a car pulling away, and then she caught her breath. Amber stood up and walked over to one of the windows cut into the stone. Rough, irregular squares, just enough to let light into the cave and gauge the thickness of the stone walls. The cave was cold, and it would get even colder at night. Amber knew she didn't have much time. Very little. 24 hours, maybe less, and no one would come here in that time. She didn't even doubt that. She couldn't think about her mother and grandmother going crazy at home. The thought of that was mentally distressing. But Amber couldn't suppress the agonizing feeling of thirst. She'd spent the entire day in the heat. She hadn't eaten since this morning. And then there was the worry. She walked slowly around the cave, examining every stone, tapping her fingers on it, but she couldn't see a glimmer of hope anywhere. The cave had been cleaned just for tourists, so that through the iron grating they could see the manicured walls, not the bare stone and ledge that had replaced the prisoner's bench and bed. And there's a rusty piece of iron sticking out. It must have been used to attach a chain if it was to be put on the prisoner to intimidate him. Night came and brought no relief. Amber's eyes adjusted to the darkness quickly enough. It wasn't complete thanks to the windows. The night was clear, the moonlight walking through the cave from end to end. Amber was cold, but she didn't notice it herself. Her mind, however, seemed ready to boil. She searched again and again for a way out and didn't find it. But far more terrible than the night was the whole of the next day, when, beginning in the morning, she waited every minute for the arrival of her tormentors. She wondered exactly what they had in mind and realized that she had nothing at all, to defend herself. Every sound made her freeze and hold her breath. But they didn't come. Maybe they thought they'd give her a hard time, make her more cooperative. Maybe Kyle was just distracted by other things. By the evening of the second day, the thirst was almost unbearable. Amber thought seriously about the possibility that maybe some moisture would show up on the stone walls at night from the temperature difference and could be licked off with her tongue. There was no way to open the iron grate on the door, no way to dig under it. There was no earth here at all, just rock. The only thing Amber tried was to squeeze through the window. She almost succeeded, but it was the very last step, a desperate move. The only way to get out the window and plummet into the abyss was if there was no other way out and death was preferable. This is my fortress, my place. Amber thought, pressing her forehead against the cold stone. Why the hell can't I do this? Is it really hopeless and these walls won't do anything to help me? She navigated the stars pretty well and fell asleep probably around midnight. But she didn't sleep long, about 2 hours. She woke up when it was starting to get light. It was nearing dawn. But the windows of the cave faced north, and it was still dark, though in the east the sky must have already turned blue. At first she thought she was dreaming. because it couldn't be. In the corner of the cave, in the darkest corner of the cave, stood a girl. She was probably about 10 or 12 years old. Fragile, thin, as if she were just bones, wearing a floor-length cherry dress that seemed to glow slightly. The girl's hair was braided, and she wore a cap like a bonnet on her head. Amber began blinking frequently and even clenched her eyelids, because it couldn't be anything other than hallucinations from nerves and dehydration. The girl walked over to her. Amber realized that if it wasn't a vision of her inflamed brain, she was facing a ghost. But the little visitor was not transparent, only very pale. She picked up a pitcher, and a pitcher she happened to have, and gave Amber a drink. Never afterward could Amber forget drinking that strange water, or rather the mist that flowed from the jug. But it quenched thirst, and more than that. It gave her strength back. Shinika Amber asked quietly, "Is that you?" The girl blinked, just as Amber had done before. She was very small, very sad, and lonely to the point of heartbreak. Maybe it had been centuries since she'd had anyone to visit her, no one to fetch water for her. With inaudible steps, the girl went to the wall and lay down on the very iron that was sticking out of the stone. Nothing happened, but Amber understood her perfectly. 2 steps were enough for her to get next to the piece of metal and do what the little guest had done, lean on it with her chest and arms. The slit that opened in the wall was so narrow it looked like a trap. Step into it, and it would crush you. The girl was no longer behind Amber, but in front of her, somewhere in the dark depths, and there was a faint glow coming from it. And the girl didn't hesitate any longer. She stepped into the cramped corridor and walked, not even walked squeezed between the walls. Sometimes she had to make an effort to move on. And if something happened here, no one would ever find her. She realized that clearly. Enthusiasm gradually waned. She was going down somewhere, and the way went on endlessly. She seemed forbidden to think about anything. She had to keep going as long as she had the strength. And then, too inwardly, she tuned in to the fact that she would fall in the end. And maybe that wouldn't be the worst outcome. So she was startled to the core when suddenly there was a whiff of fresh night air, and they found themselves in a small cave-like alcove at the very foot of the mountain. They had climbed out. There was the trail that ran down from the fortress. Amber looked around in panic, searching for the girl with her gaze, but no one was near her anymore. Only there, somewhere up on the slope where the girl's grave was, a light flashed for a moment and then went out. Or maybe it was just a star falling. By the end of that first day after Amber's disappearance, Jason knew the license plate numbers of the cars that belonged to the owner's family and his cronies. Amber could have been kept in a castle, most likely where it was even more convenient to hide loose ends, and in case of such a need, literally. And yet there was still some chance that she'd been handled differently, that she was hidden somewhere, and that chance couldn't be dismissed. Jason waited. He had managed to get much closer to the castle unnoticed than Amber had led on. He was almost beside the road, and only a keen eye would have recognized him in the green thicket. The sniper rifle was with him, and he would be in trouble if one of his master's men had spotted him. There was no other way to interpret his behavior than ambush and hunt. It wasn't the eagles he'd chosen to hunt. Jason didn't know how long he'd be here before he learned something, got a clue. But he hadn't left here yet in the late afternoon, and it was already clear that he was going to spend the night. Jason fell asleep with his head resting on the damp forest floor. His hearing was keen, and it was unlikely that anyone would be able to approach him undetected. Jason had no idea that at some point his sleep would become so sound that it would transport him to another dimension, where what he saw was real. He saw a country and a girl, as if coming from the depths of time. The clothing had a purple hue that made it impossible to distinguish the gender in the darkness. It was something like a long dress, the kind you see in ethnographic museums. The girl stepped back, giving him a view of the cave, and there was Amber, sitting on a stone ledge. The panorama shifted, as if a movie camera had decided to film the background. Now the ancient fortress lay before him like a palm of his hand, and it was there that the cave was. The prisoners were in it. He himself looked at it all, lying on the mountainside with a rifle in his hands. It was early morning. A black Jeep was driving down the road below. Jason was awake before dawn had even broken. There was no fatigue, no heaviness in his head. On the contrary, he knew exactly what to do now. He didn't have to decide what was going to happen next. It was as if everything had been decided for him. Children are not responsible for their fathers, But sometimes it is clear from the very beginning that they will surpass them. And would a bullet between the eyes be punishment enough for the master? Suffering measured in moments. But to mourn the flesh of his flesh, the one he nurtured and raised to replace him. It would take years and end with life. It was getting light when Jason reached the town where he'd started on his way to the fortress. It took him another half hour or so to climb up to the ruins of the fortress, and then climbing higher to the top to take the place he had seen in his dream. Now the whole road lay before him. Anyone approaching he would see from a distance, and he would have time to take aim. He didn't even make an attempt to find Amber. A different task now faced him. Logically speaking, the owner's son couldn't have gotten here this early. Jason had to cover his eyes to bring his image back to life. Tall, with a fresh, plump face, large lips, clenched fists. A fortunate man who had never known hard work, but was used to taking down the defenseless. So used to it that he didn't even expect his victims to resent him. Only fear was on the faces raised to him in supplication. For a moment, feelings came over Jason. Such mental strife. He lowered his head and breathed evenly to keep from throwing up. Emir couldn't have gotten here earlier, because that fat turkey would probably be asleep before lunch. But Jason had seen his car against the dawn sky in a brief vision, and now he waited. When the murmur of an engine was heard in the distance, all he had to do was move the barrel of his rifle. He was no longer a man, he had become a fearless machine, and all the measurements, calculations were going on as if outside his consciousness. He did not even try to hit the darkened windows of the Jeep. The shot hit the tire. And that was enough. Afterward, Jason stood full length on the mountain, a black silhouette against the dawn sky, and stared at the car that had gone down, flipped over, rolled over twice hard, and finally burst into a tall fire. He had a little time. He knew that the fire would be visible from afar, that it would not be long before people would be rushing here. But he did not try to hide now, even though he should have covered his tracks as soon as possible. He walked toward the fortress because he knew it was the right thing to do. And he was not surprised when he saw the figure of a girl in the distance. She froze, and then slowly began to rise toward him. He had better not meet her, because if he didn't get one chance for luck, they would look for him on the ground and underground. They'd dig deep and they'd find him eventually. He couldn't let anyone suggest that Amber's fate had anything to do with him. Jason had his own reason for revenge, and more than a good one. He didn't believe that the dead forgave everything and everyone, that they didn't care about earthly matters. Jason thought that Amelie was only now truly at peace. He also knew that everything he'd signed up for, sending the car into the abyss, was justified, and that no matter what happened to himself, it was okay, because that girl was alive and would live, and no one would ever hurt her again. And he'd only go near her for a minute to make sure she was safe. Amber was already standing 2 feet away from him, and yes, she was in one piece, but there was blood on her cheek and hair. Jason held out his hand as if asking, "What is it?" "He is, isn't he?" Amber asked, pointing at the chasm. The man nodded. Then she unclenched her palm, which held the ruby earring torn from her ear. Amber wanted to throw it into the chasm too, but the earring flew a few feet away and disappeared into the dry grass. "I'm pregnant by your husband. After learning of her husband and sister's betrayal, Jennifer left for the country. And barely. Jennifer was just leaving the clinic when she got a call from her younger sister. "Hi, what are you doing?" Her sister's voice vibrated with joy, which was very audible even over the phone. "I just got off work," Jennifer replied tiredly. "I'm getting off work. I'm going to drive home and sleep it off." "Listen, sister, Maggie said. It's the same thing every day. Aren't you tired of living such a boring life yourself?" Jennifer gritted her teeth to keep herself from saying something sarcastic to Maggie. No, she'd always been able to keep her temper in check with her younger sister. But lately, apparently because of the increased workload and the unstable family situation, Jennifer was beginning to feel her nerves fraying. "Aren't you tired of telling me the same thing every time?" she said. Jennifer got into the car and switched on the ignition. She wanted to go home, have a cup of tea, take a bath, and then crawl into bed with a blanket over her head. "Well, I'm sorry," Maggie said in a softer voice now. "No offense. I just wanted to ask you something." I didn't even doubt it, Jennifer thought to herself with annoyance. Then she turned on the car's heater. It was the middle of October outside. By 7 p.m., it was very dark outside, and it was also very cold, which was not conducive to a better mood and the desire to do anything but relax. "Did you ask me not to drag this out?" Jennifer said. "More money?" Maggie clucked her tongue. "I haven't asked you for money in a long time." "What are you saying to me, Jen?" "No, I wanted to ask you for your suitcase. Can you lend it to me for about a week? Well, 10 days tops." "Are you going somewhere?" asked the older sister, more out of politeness than genuine interest. "Yes, I'm going to the sea," Maggie answered cheerfully. "Unlike you, my plans are not all about work and home. You're the one who has always lived a boring and proper life." Jennifer remained silent. Indeed, she had always tried to live right. But did it really look boring from the outside? Perhaps for a 23-year-old girl, life between home and work does seem gray and dull. But that was Jennifer's life before marriage. Maybe she really is living life the wrong way. Von Bridget is constantly traveling somewhere and manages to work, and her personal life is boiling. And Jennifer, right after graduation, got married, got a job at the clinic, and since then in her life almost nothing has happened. Early rise in the morning, then the road to work, then the reception of patients from morning to lunch. In the afternoon, work with documents or visits to patients at home. Even on weekends, Jennifer managed to work in a private clinic. When she was on holiday, she either went on training courses or spent time at seminars and conferences. For her almost 30 years of life, she has never been to the sea, did not fly on a plane on holiday, did not buy herself a beautiful swimming costume. I guess her life really was boring and dull. Mine. Maggie even giggled into the phone. "Can you hear me? I need a suitcase." "You're always going on holiday," Jennifer replied, distracted from her sad thoughts. "Don't you have a suitcase?" Can you believe it? Maggie kept talking into the phone, unable to get a word in edgewise. "On my last trip, my suitcase was dropped when I was reloading my luggage. It cracked, and I haven't been able to buy a new one since." You bet, Jennifer thought to herself, sighing and listening to the complaining speech. You go to resorts several times a year. You don't even have time to buy a suitcase between trips. And then she suddenly regretted it and scolded herself for being too hard on her younger sister. After all, it wasn't Maggie's fault that Jennifer preferred work to leisure and could afford regular trips to the sea. "When can I come to your place to pick up my suitcase?" Maggie asked, again forcing Jennifer to switch her thoughts. "You can come whenever you want to come." "Tomorrow," said her sister cheerfully. "I don't suppose you're in any condition to receive guests today?" "Yes, tomorrow afternoon would be better. Tomorrow's Saturday. I'll be seeing patients at the clinic until 3, so come after 3. "That's fine. Thank you." The nurse chirped something else into the phone, musing about how her trip was going so well. Autumn was setting in outside. She'd be going to some hot country, splashing in the warm sea, and she wouldn't have to freeze in the city until the heating came back on. Jennifer got home at about 8 o'clock. She entered the empty flat, found the light switch in the hallway by feel, and switched on the light. She sat down on the banquette by the entrance, stretched her legs out. She sighed heavily. How lonely it was on nights like this, when Winston was late at work and Jennifer had to return to the empty, dark flat. How many times she'd wanted a cat or a dog, but then she'd talked herself out of it because she realized that because she and her husband were always busy at work, it would be hard for the poor creature to sit alone and cooped up for long hours. She took her phone out of her coat pocket. Jennifer dialed Winston's number. She didn't expect her husband to answer immediately, or that he would answer her call at all. Sure enough, the phone rang with long beeps, and her husband never answered. After preparing a quick dinner and taking a shower, Jennifer looked longingly at her mobile phone screen. Her husband never called back or even texted. Jennifer, trained by life experience, realized that it was useless to wait for a call from her eternally busy spouse. Winston, the head of the department at the regional hospital, was busy 24 hours a day. He could have an emergency operation, some urgent concilium that required his obligatory participation. There could have been a meeting. All in all, Jennifer had long since become accustomed to the fact that her husband was a very busy man. She didn't work and didn't voice her opinion on the matter. Already falling asleep in bed after a hot shower and dinner, Jennifer heard the phone ring. It was Winston calling. "I'm just leaving work." Jennifer jumped up sharply in bed and looked at the wall clock. It was past 11 o'clock in the evening. She hadn't noticed herself falling into slumber. "I'm waiting for you." "Shall I heat up dinner?" Jennifer asked. "No need. I had a snack at work. We had a meeting. Everyone was hungry by then, so we decided we'd order pizza. Anyway, I've eaten so I don't have to bother reheating the food." Jennifer breathed a sigh of relief. By the time her husband arrived home, she had a headache. So after waiting for Winston, she immediately fell asleep, not really knowing what the head of the department was so late for. In the morning, when she awoke, she found her husband no longer at home. Hopelessness, longing came over Jennifer. She ate breakfast and stared out the window alone. Then she started to get ready for her part-time job at a private clinic. For more than 5 years, Jennifer had been working as a general practitioner at the city's polyclinic, while managing patients at private clinics. She enjoyed her work, especially when she saw the results of her labor and heard the words of gratitude from her patients. Everything was going well in her work. And even despite all the difficulties, Jennifer always came out of work satisfied with herself and the results of her work. As for her personal life, then everything was not as simple as we would like. Jennifer's husband, Winston Kudryashov, was older than his wife for 20 years, and for 15 years he had been the head of a department at the regional hospital. As a specialist, Winston enjoyed high prestige, had behind his back a huge professional experience, thousands of grateful patients, and a lot of awards. Jennifer felt like a girl next to him, and given the difference in age, experience in both professional and life, the young wife only had to listen to the opinion of her wise husband. "Why are you marrying such an old man?" Jennifer was asked by her mate Maggie. "Is it a duty? Winston is almost 45, he's older than you, and he's older than you, and he's a doctor. So you'll be in constant competition. He's bound to always be better than you." "He is the best for me," Jennifer replied with a smile. "I love this man very much. You have no idea how strong my feelings for him are." She was 24 years old at the time. She was in her final year of medical school, and Winston, in her eyes, was a medical guru. Jennifer even then looked into the mouth of her future husband, listened to his advice, listened to stories from practice, and believed that fate has made her a real gift in the form of meeting and mutual sympathy with such an intelligent, beautiful, and very responsive man. They met when Jennifer was 20 years old. Winston had already turned 40. She was in her 3rd year of university, and he was consulting teachers at the university and lectured for a while on obstetrics and gynecology. Jennifer met Winston in the library. He was just dictating to one of the students a list of literature required for the course. Jennifer went there to prepare for the seminar. "Young lady, you're wasting your time in this library," Winston addressed her when she asked the librarian to look for an ophthalmology textbook for her. "Why wasted?" Jennifer looked up in surprise at the man she had often met in the walls of her university. Winston did not lecture at them, but the girl had seen his picture in the hall and knew exactly who he was. "Because the university's library is sparse on teaching materials. In terms of terminology, I advise you to buy your textbooks from a bookstore. Or better yet, order them online," Winston replied. "That's a strange suggestion from you," Jennifer grinned. "Usually our library gets all the praise, and you say the exact opposite." "I just always tell the truth," Winston said. Winston grinned, then winked at the librarian. "And don't look at me like that, Rachel. Am I wrong? Your library's been short on manuals for a long time," he said. "You're right, Winston," she sighed. Jennifer took a couple of textbooks. As she left the library, she ran into Winston again. "Will you take my advice?" he asked. Jennifer looked at Winston in surprise. "What kind of advice? Go to the shop or order online?" "Well, going to the shop and choosing the textbook you want would be faster. While you're waiting for the online order, it might not be relevant to you. Jennifer shrugged her shoulders. Well, I'll go to the bookshop then. Can I give you a lift? Jennifer was taken aback. She had never once spoken to this man. She hadn't even paid attention to him, thinking he was too experienced and not interested in talking to young female students. Winston's question, however, confused her. She looked at him incredulously, then nodded suddenly. Okay, bring me in. From that day on, communication began between them. At first, it was just idle chatter, not so much about medicine, but about the lives of students and faculty, Jennifer's childhood and Winston's adolescence. It turned out that the man had been married once. My ex-wife herself filed for divorce because of eternal employment, and I did not keep around a woman who was far from medicine and considered my work frivolous, said Winston. She was not ready to wait for me in the evenings and wanted me to socialize with other women, jealous of them and of my work too. But as a gynecologist, how could I restrict myself from socializing with the female sex? It's my job, my duty, my life after all. And then I realized that I could only live with a woman who, like me, has something to do with medicine, who would be sympathetic to my late returns and would not make hysterics and scandals about it. Is that so much to ask, Jennifer? Winston asked. Jennifer shook her head at the sound of her name in Winston's mouth. Goosebumps ran down her spine. She looked at the man differently now. In him, Jennifer saw a kindred spirit, someone close to her in spirit. Even more so. The thought that she could become a doctor and even his wife in the future made her sweetly dizzy. In the meantime, their relationship had moved to a new level, and now Jennifer often stayed overnight in Winston's flat. She felt relaxed and confident around this man. She knew that Winston was old enough and experienced enough. He would not hurt her, always support her, and also help her with her studies and explain simple truths. In general, the girl was happy, but to the last did not believe that Winston could make her a proposal. Arriving home to her parents in a small provincial town 250 kilometers from the regional center where she studied, Jennifer immediately told the truth about her relationship with a man who was almost twice her age. Are you crazy? Her mother rounded her eyes and clutched her head. You are 23 years old and he is 43. 20 years is almost a lifetime. 2 decades. Jennifer's father wasn't thrilled with his daughter's choice, but he was sympathetic to her feelings. Sharon, why do you resent it so much? There are 1 million families in the world, and they're strong enough, where the husband is older than his wife. It would be worse if it were the other way round. And Jennifer would be the guy who fell in love with an old aunt, he said. Dad, Winston is not old. Jennifer interceded for her lover. He's mature, he's wise, he's very experienced. What kind of doctor is he? Asked her mother. I'm glad your Winston is a good doctor, she said, her lips tightening. But it would be good if he was your age, not 20 years older. Edith, this is a disaster. Edward only hummed, without saying anything else. After a while, Jennifer dared to invite Winston to her parents' house for a visit. They came along with a cake and a bouquet of flowers. And then Marian melted, seeing before her a manly and intelligent man. Edic also did not say another word about what he thought about the choice of his daughter. Then Jennifer finally realized that Winston was the man with whom she would be truly happy. Maggie, however, when she saw what a grown-up groom her older sister had brought into the house, did not keep silent. He's an old man. Wrinkled nose, said 17-year-old Maggie when she and her sister were alone. What do you need it for? Jennifer wanted to take offense at her sister's words, but then she managed to resist the urge and smiled softly. You're not the one who has to live with him. What am I, you crying about him being old for me? Maggie twitched her nose upwards and wrinkled it funny again. Well, he's going to be a relative of mine. You look at him like you want to eat him. I'm sure you're already dreaming of marriage and a long life with that old man. Don't call him that, Jennifer said, feeling herself getting angry with her younger sister. He's not an old man. He's only 20 years older than I am. When you choose a fiancé, you can choose your own, but don't meddle in my affairs. Your choice. Maggie shrugged her shoulders. But sooner or later you'll regret marrying such an old man. Her younger sister's words were not prophetic. And not once in almost 6 years of married life, Jennifer did not regret that she agreed to become Winston's wife. He proposed to her in her 5th year. Then Jennifer moved into his spacious 2-bedroom flat. Soon received a diploma, got a job in the clinic, and was going to enter the residency. When her parents came to visit their daughter for the first time after the wedding, they no longer opposed Jennifer's choice, but on the contrary, they were happy that the girl so successfully married and settled in the regional center. First impressions are deceiving. Marian grinned, strolling through the huge 3-bedroom apartment in the center of town. Winston turned out to be a very nice man. He paid for the wedding and brought you to his place. Hang on to him, daughter. He's a good man. I know, Jennifer said with a smile. She was in love, happy and ready to move mountains. Being a doctor was a pleasure. Jennifer was sure that she had found a job she liked, and the results of her work pleased her. And each time convinced Jennifer that she had done the right thing. The only thing that confused the young wife of the famous gynecologist was that Winston constantly discouraged her from entering the residency. "Don't you like being a general practitioner?" he asked. "You're all glowing. You're happy to be working. So why go to school and waste your time doing it?" Jennifer didn't argue with her husband because she wasn't used to it. Winston's word was always paramount to her. So after a few months of thinking about her future, Jennifer decided that she would stay on as a general practitioner in a regular clinic. Her friends who had gone to university with her only shrugged their shoulders as they listened to Jennifer's explanations for her refusal to continue her studies. "Don't you think your Winston is just afraid of competition?" One of her former classmates once asked Jennifer. "You'll become a subspecialist and overshadow him with your practice." "You what?" Jennifer only laughed as she listened to her friend's words. "Winston is too experienced and wise enough to be afraid of competition. Besides, he's a gynecologist, which is not my field of expertise." "Are you always defending him?" Grinned her mate. "You're used to the fact that he controls you in everything. He makes you dance to his tune. Personally, I'd be offended if my husband behaved like that." "That's why Winston's my husband, not yours," Jennifer tried to make a joke, but she was suddenly uncomfortable. What if there was truth in her friend's words? What if Winston was afraid that his wife might be better than him? Jennifer carefully avoided these thoughts. She didn't want to think badly of her husband. She loved him too much. 2 years after the marriage was registered, Jennifer thought about having a child. She was already 26. Her husband was an excellent gynecologist and she had no fears about motherhood. "Winston," she said, trying not to make the words sound like a decision she'd made alone, "do you want children?" Winston looked at his wife somewhat distantly, as if Jennifer had started a conversation off topic. "Honey, why are you asking me that? You're 26 years old. It's too young to be thinking about this." "It is." Jennifer was annoyed by Winston's words. "I'm 26 years old, which is the right age to have a baby. You don't have children from your first marriage. Maybe it's time to become a father." There was so much hope and anticipation in Jennifer's voice that she could barely contain her emotions. As for Winston, it was as if he had no desire to become a father. "It's too early. Do your work. You need to make a name for yourself to be able to advance in the future." "But how am I going to get ahead if I'm just going to sit in a regular GP's office?" "You're the one who talked me out of going to school, and now you're talking me out of having a baby." Jennifer didn't notice that she had spoken with resentment in her voice, and she stopped when she saw her husband's stern look. "It's not time yet," Jennifer Winston said. And that was the end of the matter. Jennifer, unused to arguing with her husband because of his unwavering authority and age, had given herself her word that she would not bring up any more talk that displeased Winston. But Marian was not afraid to ask her eldest daughter such questions. "Do you and Winston think about children at all?" The question was painful, and Jennifer even wrinkled her nose at the unpleasant feeling inside. She and Winston had never revisited the topic of future parenthood, and what to answer her mother, Jennifer did not know. She was used to telling everyone the truth: her husband, her family, her colleagues, and her patients. But now that the question touched on such a painful subject, Jennifer didn't know how she could gently skirt the sharp edges. "It's too early for us. I'm working. Winston's working. There's plenty of time," she said. "I wouldn't say that." Marian objected, looking closely at her daughter's face. "You'll be 30 soon. And you say it's early. I gave birth to you when I was 23. And that wasn't considered too early to give birth. It's harder to have a baby after 30. There's more pain and less time. What am I explaining to you? You're a doctor yourself. Jennifer was ashamed to admit to her mother that her husband didn't want children and thought it was too early for them to become parents. Winston was about to turn 50. That was a decent enough age for a man, especially one who had no children yet. Jennifer honestly didn't understand why her husband was so resistant to the idea of children, not interested in her women's health or trying to strengthen their family. It was getting harder and harder to return home. No one was waiting for Jennifer there. She longed for a husband who was always late at work. She even began to understand the first wife of Winston, who complained about the constant absences of her husband from home and filed for divorce because of his eternal employment. But when Jennifer remembered Winston's words about how much he wanted to meet someone who would understand him and not complain about his passion for work, she immediately tried to ward off the thought of resenting her husband for his devotion to his favorite work. Having calmed down a little mentally, Jennifer decided that she didn't want to get herself worked up anymore, that she had chosen the fate of being the wife of the head of one of the departments of a regional hospital. So it was not worth complaining about her plight or berating Winston for her constant absence from home and being in the hospital. After her appointment at the private clinic, she dialed her husband's number. "Where are you?" "Still in the hospital." Jennifer asked the questions automatically, subconsciously guessing what Winston would answer her. "I'm at home, cooking dinner," her husband answered, and Jennifer's heart jumped joyfully in her chest. She'd been telling herself that Winston didn't want to be home with her, that he was looking for any excuse to stay late at work, and that he'd neglected his chores. "You surprised me," Jennifer said with undisguised joy. "What are you cooking?" "You'll find out when you get home," Winston laughed. "Maybe I want to surprise you? It won't be a surprise." Jennifer thought with awe of how wonderful her husband was. She was lucky, after all. And even though they were so rarely together, he was and still was the best man on the planet. As she entered the flat, she heard Winston's voice and someone else's female laughter. It wasn't until a moment later that Jennifer realized exactly where she had heard that laughter. It was her younger sister, Maggie, laughing. Jennifer remembered that Maggie was supposed to pick up her suitcase, but her sister usually called or texted her. She'd arrived without a call or a text. "Oh, sister." Hello, Maggie waved to Jennifer without rising from her chair in the kitchen. "I thought I'd never see you again. Why didn't you call me?" Jennifer didn't like the fact that Maggie showed up at her house unannounced. "Why?" Maggie wondered. But the smile flickered off her lips. "You told me to come round after 3. I did. We never said we'd call or text." Jennifer didn't know why she resented her little sister's arrival so much. Maggie didn't seem to have done anything wrong. She had arrived on time, and they hadn't really agreed to call in advance. But for some reason, her sister's smile, her happy face, and her contented look caused Jennifer to feel a rush of negativity. "What's wrong with me?" Jennifer asked herself that question, but she had no answer. Maggie hadn't annoyed her this much before, even though she didn't always watch her words and sometimes offended Jennifer. Maggie was the exact opposite of her older sister. Daring, self-assured, self-loving, and not tolerating objections, and Jennifer was malleable, kind, and non-confrontational. It was easier for her to agree than to argue to the point of frothing at the mouth. Maggie liked to argue, refute, prove her point of view, even if it was obvious that it was wrong. Winston set the table. By the time his wife returned from work, he had prepared fish and salad. Jennifer looked at the utensils Winston was setting on the table, but she couldn't remember the last time her husband had cooked anything himself. It had happened, but only at the beginning of the relationship, when Jennifer was still living in his flat as his wife-to-be. As soon as they legalized their relationship, all the duties of cooking, cleaning, laundry, and other household chores were fully transferred to the newly married wife of Winston. "Are you guys going on holiday?" Maggie asked in a cheerful voice. Jennifer heard a kind of gloating in her sister's question. Maggie regularly went on holiday with different men and in different countries, often allowed herself to go abroad alone. Jennifer, on the other hand, had never been to another country in her nearly 30 years of life. "We don't have time for holidays," she said, trying to keep her voice calm and confident. "We are working. You're the free-flying one." That's right, Maggie smiled broadly. I know how to take everything in life, and you all work and work until you retire. Is that how you're going to live? Jennifer glanced at her husband sitting next to her. Winston was eating his fish with a nonchalant face, as if he wasn't even listening to what the women were saying at the table. "We're not." Jennifer rose abruptly from the table. "Have you eaten? Go get your suitcase." Maggie's face changed instantly. The smile fell from her lips, her eyebrows furrowed. The younger sister clearly hadn't expected such blatant inhospitality from her older sister. "Jennifer, what are you doing?" She pouted. "I'm not bragging or making fun of your lifestyle." "Well, you like to work. I don't mind." "Of course you do," Jennifer snorted. "Get your bags. Go and get ready for your next holiday. I'm very tired. Tomorrow is my only day off and I really want to rest at least that day." Maggie was clearly offended. She thanked Winston dryly for lunch, then took her suitcase and, after a brief goodbye to Jennifer, left the house. Winston was silent the whole time and expressed no emotion. Suddenly he asked, "What are you doing? What, did she do something bad to you?" "What makes you think that?" "It's just that she takes up a lot of my time, effort, and energy. I'm tired, Winston. I wanted to spend this weekend with you, and here's Maggie and her stories about her trouble-free life." Winston grinned. "Are you jealous or something?" Jennifer felt a chill run down her spine. Her husband, who had always been characterized by his independence of opinion and lack of any emotion towards outsiders, had suddenly asked a rather strange question. A question that made Jennifer suddenly feel ashamed. Really, is it envy? Maggie was usually jealous of her older sister because she had things Maggie didn't have, opportunities Maggie didn't have due to her age. Guys who liked her older sister better than her younger sister. Jennifer was always one step ahead. And by the time she was 30, it suddenly slowed down and Maggie began to pull ahead in the quality of her life. She wasn't burdened with work, liked men, handled them skillfully, getting everything she needed and more. Jennifer seemed to be mired in her gray and boring life, with nothing but work and love for her husband. Her mood had completely soured after her sister left. And even though Winston stayed at home and was not going anywhere for work, Jennifer constantly replayed in her head her dialogue with Maggie. And why did her older sister have so much negativity inside her towards her younger sister? They had been communicating less and less lately. It had been fine at first. As soon as Maggie moved to New York, she was constantly asking to borrow money or to sleep over at Jennifer and Winston's flat. In the last 2 years, Maggie had become quite independent of both her parents and her older sister. "I completely forgot to tell you," Winston distracted his wife from sad thoughts. "On Tuesday, I'm leaving for a scientific and practical congress on obstetrics and gynecology. It turns out that I was scheduled to attend the congress, but I got so busy that I forgot about it." "That's strange." Jennifer looked at her husband in surprise. "Usually you prepare for congresses in advance. Suddenly you seem to have changed your attitude to such events." Winston brushed it off. "Work's a mess. People are quitting in droves and going to private clinics. I've lost track of time. HR called me last night and reminded me about the trip." "Where are you going?" Jennifer suddenly had a brilliant idea in her voice. What if she went to the Congress with her husband, took a few days off at work, spent time with Winston, and generally changed the environment? The idea was reckless, unusual for Jennifer, but she, annoyed by the meeting and conversation with her younger sister, suddenly also wanted to change something in her life. "To Boston," Winston said, "for 5 days." Jennifer smiled. "What if I come with you? Take a leave of absence at my own expense, and we'll go to Boston together. I'll walk around the city waiting for you. We'll go to restaurants, visit a museum, go to the theater. Do you remember the last time we went out together?" Winston shook his head. "The Congress will go on from morning until late at night, and I won't have time to go to the theaters and restaurants," Winston said. "You're going to be upset, and you're going to tug at me and keep asking me when I'm coming to see you. I'll piss you off with my absence, and our mini holiday will be a nightmare. I've been through this before, honey, and I don't want it again." Jennifer looked at her husband as if he were directly discouraging her from traveling together. Not once in the 6 years they had been together had she said a word of reproach to him. Not once had she held him or made a scandal of his prolonged absences. Why now Winston spoke as if he did not know his wife at all, as if she in his eyes had turned into his ex-wife, whom he tried with all his might to forget. "Winston, don't you want me to come with you?" Jennifer asked uncertainly, still hoping she was imagining it. "I do," Winston said hotly. He jumped up from the couch where he'd been sitting watching TV, running around the living room with his arms crossed behind his back. Jennifer watched her husband, as if she didn't recognize him as the man she had loved for so many years. "But I also want to work in peace, without the distraction of worrying about you sitting in a foreign city waiting for me. I want to meet my colleagues, chat with my professors. I want to get some sleep, after all." "Okay," Jennifer interrupted Winston and nodded briefly. "Please, just don't be so nervous. Let it be as you say." Winston abruptly stopped talking, sat down on the sofa and continued watching some medical TV program. Jennifer sat next to him and occasionally glanced at her husband, but it was as if he didn't see her. They used to sit and watch TV together like this, but now they had become complete strangers to each other. No children together, no jointly acquired property, no desire to go out and spend time together. Maybe this is the end of our marriage? Jennifer thought bitterly. He does not even want to hug me, kiss me. And we haven't had intimacy in almost a month. My husband hasn't laid a finger on me in a month, and that thought made me feel even more miserable. It seemed as if the whole world called family, so lovingly maintained for 6 years, had collapsed. Winston left on Tuesday, and up to that point nothing at all had changed in their relationship with Jennifer. The spouse no longer initiated intimacy. Jennifer kept looking at Winston, trying to figure out if he'd really lost interest in her, or if she was just imagining the problem. "There's no need to see me off," her husband said at once. "I'll go straight from the hospital to the airport. 5 days will fly by, and I'll be sure to bring you a present from Boston. Would you like that, honey?" "Of course I do," Jennifer said, and smiled a strained smile. The mood had been bad for a long time, and the situation with her husband's departure had spoiled it even more. Now Winston had asked her not to walk him to the airport, even though Jennifer couldn't do that. She worked until 3, and Winston's plane was due to leave at 5. Returning to the empty flat became a complete drag for Jennifer. She tried to stay late at work, pretending to work on paperwork and reports while she tried to stretch her time so she could get home as late as possible. The clinic closed at 8 p.m., and by that time Jennifer had to go home anyway, having vacated her office. To distract herself and not go crazy with boredom, Jennifer even signed up for yoga. She decided that she would attend a yoga studio in the evenings instead of coming home. It was both good for her health and a way to pass the time. When Jennifer returned from her first class on Thursday, she felt much better. She seemed to be energized after the workout. Her muscles were humming nicely and her body felt pleasantly tired. She wanted to go to bed as soon as possible, so that the day would be over. The sooner it was over, the sooner the new one would come. It wouldn't be long before Winston returned. Lying in bed under a blanket and looking at her social networking page, Jennifer saw Maggie's holiday photos. Her younger sister posed against the sea, standing in a brightly colored swimming costume. Jennifer quickly woke up looking at the pictures, trying not to dwell on the unpleasant thoughts that had arisen in her head. Enviously again, she thought, and quickly refreshed her social media page so that the pictures of her beautiful and happy little sister would disappear from her sight as soon as possible. However, updating the page, Jennifer suddenly noticed something unpleasantly cutting her eyes on one of the photos published by Maggie. Returning to her sister's page, Jennifer scrutinized Maggie's postings once more and then zoomed in on one of the photos. Her heart twitched unpleasantly in her chest. Her palms instantly sweated with excitement. In one of Maggie's photos, Jennifer saw a familiar figure in the reflection of a shop window. It was the figure of her husband, who had personally taken the photograph for the young girl. Jennifer enlarged the photo once more to make sure again that it was Winston. She recognized his figure, his hair, even his sunglasses. He was also wearing the plaid shirt Maggie had given him for the holiday. Back then, Jennifer had wanted to give that shirt to her father, but Winston had persuaded her to keep the gift. "Maggie gave the shirt to me. Why should I give it to your dad?" Winston asked unhappily. "Because it doesn't suit you," Jennifer replied. Jennifer didn't know why she was suddenly so attracted to Maggie's gift. Maybe it was because the shirt fit Winston so well. Jennifer herself had never guessed his taste. Her husband always dressed himself in the shops. He picked out his own shirts, trousers, jeans. He even bought his own underwear. And then some Maggie gave him a nice gift that Winston liked. Jennifer was nervous at the time. She was uncomfortable that her husband openly admired Maggie's taste. But he had a very different opinion of his own wife's taste. Until the last moment, Jennifer didn't want to believe that Winston was in the photograph. Then suddenly she remembered how her husband didn't want her to go to Boston with him, how he refused to let his wife accompany him to the airport. And that dinner he'd cooked, supposedly for his wife, had probably been prepared solely in honor of Maggie's arrival. Jennifer grabbed the phone in her hands and dialed Winston's number. "The caller is temporarily unavailable," an automated female voice answered. If Winston was in the United States, he would be in touch, but Jennifer's husband was in Greece. Of that she had no doubt. Then she dialed the number of his colleague Kevin, who was filling in for Winston during periods of his absence. Never before had Jennifer called Kevin on her own just for fun. If Winston found out about his wife's behavior now, he would clearly be displeased. "Jennifer, hello." Kevin's voice sounded soft and good-natured. "What happened to Winston? I can't get him on the phone. Is there a problem with his connection in Boston?" Jennifer clutched the phone tightly in her hand, feeling her fingers ache with tension. "Boston?" Kevin's voice sounded surprised now. "Had he gone to Boston? As far as I know, your husband went to stay with his parents in Chicago. He told me his father was sick, so he took a week off at his own expense. Winston visits his father a lot. I mean, he lives alone, he gets sick a lot. Or, Jennifer, am I confused?" Jennifer was silent, ready to cry. She knew very well that Winston does not communicate with his father. John Smith had lived in Philadelphia for many years, where he had gone with his new family while Winston was still at university. This story was told to Jennifer by Winston himself, but he apparently had a different version for his colleagues. "I'm sorry, Kevin, I'm on the phone with Winston," she said. "I got it wrong. I must have been working too hard." She switched off the connection, then tossed the phone aside with a squeamishness. Of course, no Winston had called her. She'd made up the story for Kevin, who could easily guess that Winston was misleading both his wife and his colleagues. So all her husband's trips to congresses, conferences, and other business trips were staged exclusively for her. For his colleagues, Dr. Smith went to his father, while his wife was quietly waiting for him at home, even unaware of the double life her husband led. After a while, Jennifer's hand reached for the phone. Fighting her own reluctance to know the truth, she went back to her sister Bridget's page. Here was her trip to Hawaii in April. Winston had flown to Los Angeles for a fortnight, and Jennifer had been surprised to see how tanned her husband had been when he returned from Los Angeles. And it turns out that in April in Los Angeles is so sunny. "I walked a lot. I did not notice how I burned," said Winston then. Jennifer didn't say anything to him. It did not even occur to her that her husband could be somewhere else, for example, in a hot country with her younger sister. And here was another of Maggie's trips, this time to the Bahamas. Winston was away from home then, too. He was supposedly on a flight to Denver. Except it was summer outside, and it was normal for him to return with a slight tan. There were other trips. Jennifer had counted at least 5 in the last 40 minutes. It had started almost 2 years ago. At least the joint disappearances from Jennifer's life had been observed since the December before last. And Ben had just turned 21 at the time. She'd barely graduated from university and got a job as a receptionist at a beauty parlor. But she worked there for just under 6 months. She quit in December, and then in March she and Winston were out of town together. Bridget chattered something about a new lover, after which there was another, then again another and another third. But Jennifer was not interested in her younger sister's private life, and for nothing. I wonder if she met only with Winston or in parallel? Jennifer thought. Did she have other men? She was still in shock at her own discovery. To have lived with her husband for so many years, and now to suddenly find out that for the past 2 years he had been lying to her, dating her sister, traveling the world with her, paying for her purchases, catering to her every desire. His wife had done his laundry, cooked his breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, and waited faithfully for him at home. Without a word or a hint, she never let him know she was unhappy with anything. Jennifer was comfortable. People like her were usually called patient. By morning, she was sick of her own thoughts. All night she had been thinking that she had to make some decision about her future, because she would never have a future with Winston. I wondered, Jennifer thought, what was the purpose of this marriage show? He would have divorced me and lived with Maggie if he liked being with her so much. He'd long since grown cold to me. Winston came home as promised on Sunday, happy and lightly tanned. He called Jennifer a couple of times via Messenger, sending her some meaningless pictures to put her guard down. She'd responded to him with something to keep Winston from guessing that she knew all about his cheating perfectly well. Jennifer prepared herself for the conversation, going to clear the air. She had to gather her strength to find the right words that would not make her feel ashamed. No, she wouldn't make hysterics and scandals. They would part ways quietly if Winston wanted them to. What do I want? Jennifer thought. I want to endure further. I am willing to endure because I love this man and would do anything to be with him. I haven't existed apart from Winston for a long time. I belong to him completely. I'm like his soulmate that would die if I was separated from him. Winston talked cheerfully about his trip, making up stories as he went along that didn't really happen. Jennifer listened to him, smiling and nodding, while she realized with every passing minute that she couldn't tell Winston that she knew everything. She couldn't live without him. She never got round to talking to him, and after a few days she calmed down and decided that she would not part with her husband. She loved him and let him have an affair on the side. It was easy to break up a marriage, but to keep it together was still a challenge. So Jennifer decided she would endure to the end. At the end of another working day, when she was about to go home, there was a knock at her office. "The reception is over," Jennifer shouted, but the door opened anyway. Maggie stood on the doorstep, and the older sister's insides snapped at the sight of her younger sister. "Why are you here?" Jennifer asked with whitened lips. "We need to have a serious talk," Maggie replied. Jennifer realized then that something had happened. Something had happened that was out of her control. Something she had miscalculated. What it was, she was going to have to find out from her younger sister. "I'm pregnant," Maggie said after a long silence. The sisters sat next to each other, carefully avoiding the opportunity to look into each other's eyes, and remained silent until Maggie said two words that turned Jennifer's mind completely upside down. "Do I have to answer something?" Barely moving her lips, Jennifer asked. Jennifer's insides felt as if they had collapsed, and her lips and tongue stopped obeying her. "Shouldn't I?" Maggie replied shortly. "I'm the one who has to tell you. I'm pregnant by Winston, your husband. I'm tired of hiding the fact that I've been with him for a long time." Jennifer was silent. She fumbled with a piece of paper that had appeared on her desk. She couldn't say anything. It was like her tongue was stuck to her mouth. "Can you hear me?" Maggie asked demandingly. "I'm expecting your husband's child. I've been sleeping with him for a long time. A fortnight ago, he and I were on holiday in Miami, and before that we had sex at your house. Remember that spontaneous dinner at your place? You came over and told me to get my suitcase and you were leaving. I did. Only before that, I slept with your husband in your marital bed." The words were harsh, and Jennifer felt completely embarrassed by the filth. She didn't feel like it. She had tried to save her marriage to the last. Except who wanted it? Nobody. The child needed a father, no matter how immoral the child had been conceived. He was not to blame for his mother's recklessness, for his father's uncontrolled behavior. "What do you want from me?" Jennifer asked dryly. "For me to congratulate you? That I run home and scandalize my husband? That I look at myself in the mirror and try to see horns on my head?" Jennifer was about to scream, but Maggie, sitting across from her, kept her composure. Yes, that young woman had a lot of composure. She'd been scolded so many times by her parents, her grandmother, her teachers. Maggie didn't care about any of that. She had a way of keeping her cool, and that made Jennifer even more annoyed. "I want you to know the truth," Maggie said and stood up. "What you're going to do next, I don't know." "But I do," Jennifer said through gritted teeth. She left, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume. Jennifer thought about it and breathed in the air, realizing that she had often smelled it on her husband's shirts, the same shirts that her younger sister Maggie must have helped him buy. Everything in her family wasn't real her husband's love, the family idol, the way they lived together. So there was no happiness in the Winston household. Then why did they waste their time on each other? Returning home after work, Jennifer caught Winston there. Quickly gathering the necessary clothes into her suitcase, she put her books, laptop, and tablet in there as well. Then she closed it and sat down next to it on the bed. Covering her eyes, she tried to listen to herself and her sensations. What did she feel? Fear, resentment, hurt, disappointment. The last was perhaps the most vivid feeling. It was disappointment that Jennifer felt at losing her fake family. It was only an imitation of happiness, so it was necessary to leave without regret. Taking a piece of paper, Jennifer wrote a short note to Winston in the quick handwriting she had become accustomed to during her years at the clinic. I know all about you and Maggie. I see no point in staying in this house. I will divorce you myself. We have nothing to share. Let's part amicably. There were no other words that came to mind. Jennifer did not write a long speech, but simply picked up her suitcase and left the flat. She took one last look at the wedding photograph hanging on the living room wall, where she and Winston were smiling broadly and happily, and got into the car. Their happiness was still real then. Jennifer calmly drove out of the city, refueled, and drove down the motorway. There were more than 300 kilometers to go. Staring into the darkness, she tried to remain calm and composed. Around 5 a.m., she was near a village with no streetlights, but a crumbling sign at the entrance and something that looked like a monument to chicken pox. Pulling over, Jennifer got out of the car, breathed in the fresh country air, and finally let the tears flow. For the 5 hours that Jennifer had been on the road, she had managed to remain calm and confident. But the village had turned her inside out. Standing in the darkness and the rain that had begun to fall, she felt endlessly tired and homesick. Pull yourself together, she commanded herself, and then settled back behind the wheel and drove towards home. The house Jennifer stopped the car at had once belonged to her grandmother Julia, the mother of her father and Aunt Maggie. All her life, her grandmother had lived in this village 50 kilometers from her hometown. Several times she visited her son and his family, but she herself did not go anywhere further than the village. While Julia was still alive, she signed over her house to her eldest granddaughter, Jennifer. Maggie, learning of this then, took great offense at her sister. "You always get the best of everything," she cried with tears in her voice, "and the best room and clothes. Now grandmother's house too." "My God, Maggie, don't scream." Marian then cringed at her youngest daughter's loud, hysterical scream. "It's a house in the middle of nowhere. What do you want it for? No one has bought anything in this village for a long time, so you wouldn't get any benefit even if your grandmother wrote the house in your name." "What's that got to do with it?" Maggie smeared tears down her face. "How am I any worse than Jennifer? Why does she get everything all the time and I get everything on my own?" Jennifer remained silent at the time. She remembered how many times during her grandmother's lifetime she had visited her in the village, monitored her health, went with her to the city clinic, prescribed medicines. Maggie had never once visited her grandmother in her entire adult life. Once in a while she called her, and that only to borrow money, which in the end did not return. But after the death of her grandmother, who left the house to the eldest granddaughter, Maggie took offense, as usual, accused her older sister that she gets everything for nothing, for the pretty eyes. Maggie didn't speak to Jennifer for a long time after that. The house, left after the death of Julia's grandmother, was small, rather dilapidated, but inside it was very cozy and warm. Jennifer, every time she came to the village to visit her grandmother's grave, stopped in the house with joy and awe, looking at the old crockery, photographs, paintings on the wall, small statuettes on the chest of drawers. And everything in the house was the same as it had been when Grandma Julia was still alive. As children, when Jennifer was 12 and Maggie was 6, they had come together to visit her grandmother for the summer. That summer seemed to Jennifer the happiest of her life, but Maggie didn't like it in the village. "I hate goat's milk, and I don't like cow's milk, it's fatty. And I don't want to eat pancakes. My grandmother can't bake them. And I won't eat the chicken that has been running around since morning, I feel sorry for it. And I will not go to the vegetable garden, my nose will burn." and then there will be a trace. Whatever Grandma Jennifer offered, Maggie refused. She did not like country life. The girl thought it was boring and monotonous, but Jennifer enjoyed spending time with her grandmother. Most of all, she liked to go with her grandmother Julia to the collective farm, where she worked as a veterinarian. Perhaps it was from these trips that Jennifer's love of medicine was born. "You have the makings of a future doctor," Julia said. "Think about your future. You may want to connect it with medicine." Jennifer had made up her mind then. She would definitely be a doctor. She would help people. That was her calling, and she was happy with her choice, immensely grateful to her grandmother for her support. And now Jennifer was back at her grandmother's house. Only this time she came not for a while, but for permanent residence. There was nowhere else to go. To stay in the house where Winston was, there was neither strength, nor desire, nor possibility. Jennifer could not claim her husband's flat. It was his personal property. And she had no place of her own, for until a few weeks ago the young woman had had the assurance that she would be with her husband until she was old. But no, not all wishes were destined to come true, and Jennifer had experienced this firsthand. Collapsing onto the bed, she buried her face into the pillow. The bedclothes smelled damp, and the house itself, unheated and uninhabited for several years, didn't look much like a cozy nest. Jennifer had a lot of work to do to put the house in order, quit her old job, get a job in the village, file for divorce. But most importantly, learning to live a new life in which Winston would no longer be there. Remembering him, Jennifer picked up the phone. 15 missed calls from her husband, 2 missed calls from her mother, and 1 from her father. Maggie hadn't called her, and Jennifer bitterly imagined how happy she and Winston were to be together. Calling her mother, Jennifer told it like it was. "I've left Winston. I'm going to live in the country." "How, but why? You have such an amazing husband. How did you have the courage to leave him? And more importantly, why?" "Ask your youngest daughter," Jennifer replied, feeling a surge of anger again. No, it was urgent to pull herself together, to push away the anger, jealousy, and resentment. There should be nothing in her life that connected her to the past. "What has Maggie to do with it?" Marion didn't hide her surprise. "Maggie is expecting my husband's child. In fact, she's been seeing him for a long time." "Mom, let's close this topic. I'll buy a new SIM card tomorrow and this number won't be available. I'm filing for divorce, changing my life and my job." Marion was still shouting something into the phone, but Jennifer wasn't listening to her anymore. Jennifer was terribly sleepy. It was already late at night. She didn't want to think about anything. She fell into sleep. At her grandmother's house, Jennifer thought longingly of the next day, which would now be radically different from the days she was used to. In the morning, she woke up with her nose tangled in the blanket. The house was cold, and it appeared that the first snow had fallen outside the window. Jennifer was glad that she had managed to cover the 300 kilometers on a dry road. But she would hardly have dared such a rash act if there had been ice on the motorway. She had to do something about the stove. She also had to buy groceries and call her former job. Having somehow explained the situation, Jennifer listened to a lot of complaints from the head doctor, but managed to agree to send her resignation letter by registered mail. "You've really let us down," shouted into the phone head doctor. And Jennifer understood it well without him. Leaving the polyclinic without a therapist in the midst of flu and acute respiratory viral infections was unfair, ill-considered, and selfish, in the doctor's opinion. Jennifer did not initiate him into the details of her personal life, saying that she went to another city for family reasons. Having resolved the job issue, she dressed warmly and went to the post office. "Oh my God," Jennifer, the operator, addressed her, holding out an envelope and a blank sheet on which Jennifer was to write her resignation letter. "Yes, that's me," Jennifer smiled weakly, remembering how she and her grandmother Julia had once gone to this woman's house to watch little newborn piglets. Postal Service operator Rachel lived 2 houses down from the late Julia. "Why are you here?" "I'm here to visit my grandmother's grave." "And why would you write a letter?" Jennifer sighed. Now she would have to get used to a new life where everyone and everything had to know everything. That was what village life was like, and there was nothing Jennifer could do about it. Jennifer guessed that after her visit to the post office, News of her arrival would spread throughout the village. I'm going to live here, she decided that it was better to tell the truth at once than to answer a million more questions from the villagers. There were about 200 people living in the village. All of them had known the late Julia, and Jennifer herself might have to meet them all. Some she knew and remembered, some she had yet to make acquaintance with. Live Rachel's face stretched. Why's that? You didn't fit in at the regional center. No, it didn't, Jennifer sighed. And we've got a paramedic about to retire. Now Rachel's face lit up with a happy smile. Listen, you're a doctor. Why don't you come down to the paramedic station and talk to Sharon? She's just sitting there. She's almost 70 years old. She should be looking after her own health, not treating the villagers. Jennifer nodded, not really thinking about working at the paramedic station. In fact, she was more inclined to think about working in a nearby town that would have its own clinic. Rachel, do you know who can help me with the cooker? I don't know how to use it. It's very cold in the house. Is that what city folk mean? Rachel grinned. I think my Oliver can help you too. Oliver. Jennifer tried to remember a certain Oliver, but to no avail. Yes, my son, he's just visiting me right now. He came back from his shift, and instead of going to his place, he's staying with me for the time being. Either he had a fight with his wife, or he just doesn't want to go home. Anyway, come to my place. He was supposed to chop wood today. And he'll give you some wood and help you with the stove. Jennifer thanked her neighbor and almost ran to her house. The thought of returning to a house that looked more like a huge glacier did not please her at all. I don't want to fall down in these parts, Jennifer thought. There are no proper hospitals here, no way to get a full checkup. Oliver was home. When Jennifer saw him through the fence, she didn't immediately recognize him as the boy she had once run to the river with. They had been 14 years old then. The boy seemed overly bold and brave, and he was a real bully. And I recognized you straight away, Oliver smiled. Remember when you almost drowned? And I saved you. Jennifer laughed. I didn't drown. You didn't save me? You pushed me into the river yourself. But now you could very well save me. My cooker doesn't work in my house, and I have no idea how to use it. Will you help me? Oliver agreed. Together they worked out how to use the cooker properly. Then they drank tea, laughing and reminiscing about their childhood and their childhood mischief. Afterwards, they discussed mutual acquaintances, about whose fate Oliver knew much more than Jennifer, who had lived in the regional center for a long time. Then the topic drifted to a discussion of her own personal life. Jennifer didn't go into details, only briefly told him that she had left her husband and would now try to start a new life. But you're a risk-taker, Oliver said admiringly. To take a sudden change like that, I don't think I'm capable of that at all. You don't know the details, that's why you think that way, Jennifer replied sadly. Before she knew it, she was talking to her childhood friend, and they sat there until lunchtime. The house was warm and cozy, and she didn't want to stop talking to such an interesting person. Jennifer suddenly realized that over the many years she had been married to Winston, she had completely forgotten what long, intimate conversations were like. After all, in the last few years, Winston was always busy. He had neither the time nor the inclination to talk to his wife. He must have discussed all the interesting things with Maggie, Jennifer thought bitterly, sinking back into her sad thoughts. And why are you stuck at your mother's? Why aren't you going home? Jennifer asked Oliver to distract herself from the realization of the worthlessness of her past life. Oliver shrugged. Honestly, I'm afraid to. My wife recently had a baby and I don't feel like I can handle it. Jennifer raised her eyebrows in surprise. You're afraid you won't be able to handle your own child? Are you serious? Oliver nodded. Seriously. Why? I'm a regular working man. My hands aren't made for this. When I pick up a pram, God forbid I drop it or push it. I'm afraid. Anyway, so I've been stalling. I fixed my mother's shed, rebuilt the roof. I'm thinking, what else can I do so I can go on shift right afterwards without going home? Oliver, it doesn't work that way. Jennifer shook her head. You put yourself in your wife's shoes. How does she feel? What does she think about you not going home? Her hormones are already raging right now. She's having a hard time, not getting enough sleep with a small child. And you didn't even come and see him? You want to, don't you? Oliver nodded, lowering his head. I want to, but I'm afraid to. You're a big man, and you're afraid of a small, helpless baby. Oliver, come on, you have a little brother, don't you? You spent your whole childhood with him, carrying him everywhere. Your mom almost left you with him forever. Nothing happened. I wasn't thinking straight then, Oliver said. I didn't have much choice. My parents made me do it. Now no one does. Yeah, Jennifer grinned. Did you ever think about the fact that your stressed-out wife is going to take it upon herself not to let you on the doorstep when you finally get the courage to do it? Oliver looked at Jennifer, and his eyes grew wider and wider. Why wouldn't she let me in? I'm the husband. And where are you now? Are you the husband? Why are you sitting here? Not with your family doing everything you can to avoid seeing your wife and child, Oliver. But she has every right to do the same to never see you, Jennifer said. Oliver fell silent. There was nothing for him to object to. The next day, though, when Jennifer met Rachel, she learned from her that Oliver had gone to stay with his family. Packed up all his things dramatically yesterday and ran for the bus this morning. Thank God his brains are back in place. And that stuck out at my place, and at home a small son with his wife. Even I was embarrassed. Jennifer smiled and said nothing. As she walked to the shop, she thought about the fact that she might have made a husband and wife closer by bringing something good into the world. Now that she wasn't treating her patients, and she'd fled the city in disgrace, leaving her patients for other doctors, she felt guilty. The situation with Oliver at least redeemed that guilt a little. Entering the shop, Jennifer looked disappointedly at the shelves. She realized that village grocery shopping was going to be a disappointment. The shelves were lined with cereals, sugar, salt, washing powders, and shampoos. And it was impossible to buy the usual meat, frozen vegetable mixes, and dairy products. What are you going to buy? Jennifer was approached by a shop assistant, and in her Jennifer recognized her childhood friend Chloe. She recognized her with great difficulty because Chloe had changed so much. She and Jennifer were about the same age, except that Chloe was 1 or 2 years older. But she looked in her 30s and tails for all 45. The woman was clearly a heavy drinker. Her face was haggard, her eyes were red, and her hands were shaking, as if Chloe had drunk a lot the day before. Chloe, it's you. Isn't it? Jennifer asked instead of answering, and the woman tightened her lips and nodded faintly. Let's say it's me. What are you going to buy? I have a closing in 10 minutes, Chloe replied impolitely. Ah, closing time, Jennifer grinned to herself. Behind Chloe's back, she saw an open bottle of vodka on one of the shelves and next to it a shot glass and sliced apples. Chloe was clearly not going to close up to finish the day's work, but to get a hangover. You've just changed so much, Jennifer said, continuing to insist and watching the way Chloe's eyes raced. And you smell so heavy in here. It's spoiled goods. It stinks from the back room, Chloe replied quickly, and then threw her chin up defiantly. What are you doing here? Telling me off? Buy your food and go back to your place. Rude, Chloe, Jennifer said in an even voice, not trying to take offense at her former mate. It's not my fault you look 40 years old. You have kids, don't you? My grandmother told me. Look, get out of here, Chloe shouted. She ran out from behind the counter and forcefully pushed Jennifer towards the exit. You're going to teach me about life. Idea girl, teach others. Chloe, if you need help, come to me, Jennifer managed to say before the shop assistant slammed the shop door in her face. Having not bought anything from the shop, Jennifer decided that she would drive to a nearby town. The snow on the roads was already melting. She needed time to buy groceries and change the summer tires for winter ones. When she returned home in the evening, she noticed a female figure at the gate of Julia's grandmother's cottage. In the darkness, it was hard to make out who it was. But then Jennifer realized it was Chloe, the same one who had pushed her out of her shop back in the morning. Let's go inside, Jennifer said, holding out 2 bags to Chloe. Will you help me carry the groceries in? Chloe obediently followed Jennifer in. At first, they sat in silence. Then Jennifer put the kettle on, poured tea into mugs, placed vases of sweets on the table. Try some, they're delicious. I know they're very rare here. I used to buy them for the kids. Chloe suddenly burst into tears. Her shoulders were shaking, and Jennifer, silently watching the woman sitting opposite, got up from her chair, poured water into a glass and handed it to her guest. "Help me," Chloe pleaded. "I can't stop. Since Ben died, I've been going downhill. I know I should stop, but I can't. It's like there's a force in me that makes me drink vodka. I drink it, but it doesn't get easier, and I keep dreaming about Ben, and the children crying, and I can't control myself," Chloe said through her tears. Jennifer nodded. "Okay, I'll try to help you. Firstly, you're going to buy some pills in town, you're going to take them, and if you drink after them, they'll take you to the hospital. Secondly, they'll dull your desire to drink. We'll go into town together tomorrow. We'll make an appointment for you to see a doctor there. You should definitely do that. I'll drive you myself, go with you to the appointment, because I suspect you won't have the courage or strength to do it yourself." Chloe looked at Jennifer with wet eyes, nodded occasionally, and sipped water from the glass. "Are you really going to help me? Is that what you want? I want your children to grow up to be normal people, not afraid of their mother and not see everything that happens to you. You don't think about them as much as you usually do." "But you do," Jennifer said with a smile and handed Chloe a candy bar. "Take it, eat it, stay at my place tonight. You'll do something stupid like you did this morning and you'll be sorry." A few days after this conversation, when Jennifer and Chloe had already gone to the city, together went to the hospital, and Chloe was scheduled for treatment, people came to Jennifer's house. They all had different problems. Someone wanted to be cured of excessive alcohol consumption. Someone was worried about back pain. Someone in the stomach. In general, Chloe, who worked in the only shop in the village, encouraged after seeing a doctor and receiving help from Jennifer, told all the other residents about the dependability of her new friend and the fact that she worked in the regional center as a therapist. Jennifer never said no to anyone. And now the house of Masha's late grandmother turned into a kind of outpatient clinic. They brought her vegetables, meat, chicken, eggs. Someone tried to slip Jennifer money, but she took only food, and that as a thank you from happy old ladies who received prescriptions for medicines and learnt that they had no deadly diseases. Then Sharon, the same one who worked at the local health center as a paramedic, came to Jennifer's house. "Enough of this nonsense, Jenny," she said. "Did you get your employment history? Go to town and get you employed. I'm retiring. I've already written my application. And you shouldn't be taking people in and treating them with pickles in your house." Jennifer nodded. Totally agree with what Sharon said. She was going to go to town with the paperwork herself, but Sharon beat her to the punch with her suggestion. 2 weeks later, Jennifer was taking appointments at the local nursing station. She often thought about her old life, but she had no regrets. She had too much work to do, which finally gave her a burst of energy and a desire to move on with her life. In the course of her work, she managed to file for divorce, then received a certificate of divorce. She went to the regional center twice and fortunately did not meet her ex-husband or her sister. In conversations with her mother, Jennifer carefully avoided the topic of her past life. She never asked about Maggie, and Marion tactfully left out how her sister and ex-husband Winston lived. Jennifer didn't know about it and didn't want to know. She guessed that both Maggie and Winston knew perfectly well that Jennifer lived in the settlement. Only neither of them had ever come to her, repented or apologized. In February in the township, as the blizzards began, they came one after another, and the local authorities, unaccustomed to such bad weather, were surprised that by the end of winter, this time of year was just beginning to gain momentum. "It's a wicked winter," explained one of the old ladies who came to see Jennifer. "It doesn't want to go away. It fights spring. We always have snowfalls in February, so much snow. It melts quickly, but it doesn't get swept away by the wind. Be well." Jennifer nodded. She still had much to learn about village life, which she was finally starting to get used to after a few months. The village was peaceful, quiet, and life flowed at a measured pace. Jennifer liked her job, and now she knew everyone in the small village. "Thank you, Julia," they often said to her, referring to her grandmother. "Raised such a wonderful granddaughter. A pleasure to us all." Jennifer smiled modestly, not commenting on the patient's words. It did make her happy to know that her grandmother spoke so well of her. It meant she had lived a life worth living. One snowstorm, Jennifer left work early. The patients were gone, and a real snowstorm was brewing outside her window. After closing the nurse's station, Jennifer trudged through the snowdrifts towards her home. As she approached, she noticed the open gate, but thought that it had opened because of strong gusts of wind. However, as she stepped up onto the porch, she saw the door to the house open. "What the hell is that?" she muttered as she approached the door, and then noticed a man's boots at the entrance. Her heart sank. As if in slow motion, she walked into the house and saw Winston sitting at the table. Turning around, he looked at her with an intimidated look, then gave her a strained smile. "Sorry, I'm uninvited." And Jennifer stopped in the doorway and leaned helplessly with her back against the door. It was unclear whether her strength had left her from the arduous journey home or because of her ex-husband's arrival. "Why did you come?" With difficulty moving her lips, she asked. "I came to beg forgiveness," he replied, rising from his chair. "I wanted to come sooner, but I lacked courage. Forgive me." Outside the window, the elements raged. Jennifer wanted to push Winston out the door, to slam the door in his face as Chloe had once done to her. But the blizzard was too frightening, and she wouldn't dare throw a man out into the weather and put his life in danger, even if she very much wanted to hurt someone who had once hurt herself. "I forgave you long ago," Jennifer replied. "I've already forgotten about everything, and I advise you to forget about everything. Live happily ever after," Jennifer said. "I even left myself to give you the opportunity to be a happy husband and father of your child." "Maggie is not pregnant by me," Winston replied. "I can't have children. All these years I haven't told you the truth. My first wife left me for that reason, and I was afraid of losing you, so I kept quiet. Maggie's pregnancy, by which she wanted to keep me, was a consequence of her frivolous life." Jennifer grinned. "You chose that girl, now take responsibility for it yourself. I don't want to know anything." Winston approached Jennifer and tried to take her hands, but she took a step backwards. Then he suddenly dropped to his knees, lowering his head and holding out his hands to his ex-wife. Jennifer cringed, seeing the pathetic picture before her. How many times had she imagined Winston begging her forgiveness? But now this moment had come, and she felt nothing but squeamishness and a desire to end this spectacle as soon as possible. "Come on, get off your knees, it won't do you any good," she said. "I realized exactly why you were here today. You took advantage of the bad weather so I couldn't kick you out, but it won't help you." Winston lifted his head and looked into her face. "Do you really like this life? Do you like living in the township, socializing with these uneducated and miserable people? You are a doctor with a capital letter." "Shut up," Jennifer interrupted him. "It's not for you to talk about how bad people live here. You're not known for your own integrity. And I could have been a doctor with a capital letter if I'd gone on to further study. You talked me out of it. Now I'm going to be a little doctor in this little village. I'm leaving. And I want you gone by the time I get back. You put the key back where you got it from." Jennifer walked out of the house, breathing heavily and gulping for air. It was hard to walk, the wind whipping in her face, filling her eyes with snow. But Jennifer didn't stop, stepping firmly through the loose snow. After a few minutes, having overcome a snowdrift almost a meter high, she knocked on the door of Chloe's house. Half an hour later, they were sitting at the table drinking tea. "So, did you really kick him out?" Chloe asked. "I asked him to go home. I didn't kick him out," replied Jennifer. "I can't live with a man who betrayed me once. If I do, I'll be constantly expecting him to betray me again. No, I can't do that. If my Ben were alive, I think I would forgive him for the sake of our children," Chloe said then, sobbing, and put her arm around Jennifer's shoulders, rocking her like a child. "We don't have children, and there's no point in our marriage," Jennifer replied. "Winston can't have children." After saying those words and looking at Chloe's 2 kids playing cars on the bed in the room, Jennifer smiled. She wants kids. She wants to live a happy new life where there will be no room for betrayal. It was necessary to wait a little while. And sooner or later, a big love was sure to appear in her little life.